They said she was nobody. A mistake. A burden eating scraps in a mansion that should have been a tomb for forgotten girls like her. But Clara Whitlock wasn't nobody. She was the rightful owner of everything they'd stolen, and they had no idea she was about to burn their world to ash. If you want to see how a woman they left for dead becomes the one thing they fear most, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's go. Clara's hands were raw, not from work, though there was always work, but from the cold. Ravenmore Estate didn't believe in heating rooms where servants slept, and Clara had long since learned that complaining only made things worse. She'd tried once, years ago, when she was 14, and still foolish enough to believe her voice mattered. Madame Caro had laughed in her face. "You want warmth?" she'd said, her eyes glittering with cruel amusement. "Then work harder. Earn it." Clara never asked again. Now, at 23, she pressed her fingers against the stone wall of the corridor, letting the chills seep into her bones. It helped, somehow. Reminded her she was still alive, still breathing, still here, even if no one else seemed to notice. The estate stretched around her like a sleeping giant. 3 stories of dark wood and darker secrets, with corridors that twisted like a labyrinth and rooms that hadn't been opened in decades. It had been built by the Whitlock family 200 years ago, back when their merchant empire stretched across 3 continents and their name meant something. Now it meant nothing. The Whitlocks were gone, extinct, forgotten. And Ravenmore belonged to the Caros, a family who'd bought it for pennies on the pound and proceeded to bleed every ounce of grandeur from its bones. Clara moved silently through the halls, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. She'd learned to walk like a ghost, to exist in the spaces between other people's attention. It was safer that way, easier, invisible. "Clara!" The voice cracked through the silence like a whip, sharp and cold. Clara flinched, her shoulders tensing automatically. She turned slowly, already knowing what she'd see. Madame Isolde Caro stood at the far end of the hallway, backlit by the dim glow of gas lamps. Her silver hair was pulled tight into a bun that seemed designed to stretch her face into a permanent scowl. She was draped in black silk, always black, as if she were in perpetual mourning for a life she'd never actually lost. And her fingers were weighed down with rings that caught the candlelight like tiny, angry eyes. Behind her stood her son, Edmund. He was 32, soft around the middle, with thinning hair and the kind of weak chin that spoke of generations of inbreeding among aristocratic families desperate to keep their bloodlines pure. He looked at Clara the way most people looked at furniture, something functional, forgettable, beneath notice. "Where have you been?" Isolde's tone was sharp, impatient, designed to cut. "The library fire has gone out again. Do you expect the Duke to sit in darkness when he arrives?" Clara's stomach tightened. She'd cleaned the library this morning, scrubbed the floors until her knees ached, polished the bookshelves until the wood gleamed. But she hadn't thought about the fire. Stupid. Careless. "The Duke?" Clara asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Isolde's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Yes. Duke Rowan Ashford. He returns tonight from his estates in the north. We are hosting him for the season, and if this house is not prepared to receive a man of his station, it will be your fault, girl. Do you understand me?" Clara nodded quickly, her throat tight. "Yes, madame." "Then move. Now." Clara moved. She slipped past Isolde and Edmund, keeping her eyes down, her movements quick and efficient. She could feel Edmund's gaze following her, lingering on her back in a way that made her skin crawl. He'd done that more and more lately, watching her when he thought no one else was looking, standing too close when they passed in hallways, making comments that walked the razor's edge between propriety and something far more dangerous. Clara had learned to avoid him whenever possible. Down the corridor she went, through the servants' passage hidden behind a panel in the wall, into the vast, echoing library that occupied the entire east wing of Ravenmore. The room was enormous. 3 stories of shelves stacked with leather-bound volumes no one had touched in years, towering windows that overlooked the moors, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. It was also freezing. Clara knelt beside the hearth, her knees pressing into the cold stone floor. The fire had indeed gone out. The embers were nothing but ash now, gray and lifeless. She reached for the iron poker leaning against the wall, stirring through the remnants, searching for any lingering heat that might be coaxed back to life. Nothing. She exhaled slowly, her breath misting in the cold air, and began rebuilding the fire from scratch. Kindling first, thin strips of wood she'd prepared that morning, stacked in the brass bucket beside the hearth. Then larger pieces, arranged in a careful pyramid that would catch and hold the flames. As she worked, her mind wandered. Duke Rowan Ashford. She'd heard the name before, whispered in corners by servants who thought she wasn't listening, spoken with a mixture of fear and fascination by the merchants who delivered supplies to the estate. He was a legend, of sorts, the black sheep of the Ashford family, exiled years ago for reasons no one dared speak aloud. Some said he'd killed a man in a duel over a woman's honor. Others said he'd refused to marry the girl his family had chosen for him and had been cast out for his defiance. Still others claimed he'd simply grown tired of playing by the rules of polite society and had walked away from it all, title, wealth, expectation, to carve out his own path in the wild northern territories where law was more suggestion than commandment. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Duke Rowan Ashford was dangerous. And now he was coming here. Clara struck the flint against the steel, watching sparks dance across the kindling. Once, twice, 3 times. The fire caught slowly, reluctantly, as if even the flames were hesitant to burn in this place. But it caught. She sat back on her heels, watching the light grow, feeling the first whispers of warmth against her frozen fingers. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself relax. Careful. The voice came from behind her, low, smooth, utterly unexpected. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. She spun around so fast she nearly knocked over the fire iron, her pulse roaring in her ears. A man stood in the shadows near the doorway. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame. He was dressed in dark wool and leather, his long coat dusted with road grime and what looked like dried mud. His hair was black, cut short but disheveled, as if he'd been riding hard and hadn't bothered with a mirror. And his eyes, sharp, storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone, watched her with an intensity that made every nerve in her body light up like a warning flare. He looked like a man who'd seen violence and hadn't blinked. Clara scrambled to her feet, her hands trembling. I didn't hear you come in. I noticed. He stepped forward into the firelight, and Clara got her first clear look at his face. Striking. That was the word that came to mind. Not handsome in the soft, aristocratic way Edmund was supposed to be handsome. This was something harder, more dangerous. Angular cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Thin and white, old but permanent. A fighter's face. You're the Duke, Clara said quietly. It wasn't a question. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Rowan. Just Rowan. I'm Clara. I know. She blinked, caught off guard. You do? Madame Caro mentioned you. His gaze swept over her, not leering, not invasive, but assessing in a way that made her feel suddenly visible. The invisible girl who keeps this place running while everyone else takes credit. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Rowan moved closer, his boots silent on the stone floor despite his size. He had a way of moving that reminded Clara of the wild cats that sometimes prowled the moors. Fluid, controlled, dangerous. She didn't mention you were intelligent, he continued, his voice thoughtful. I'm not... Clara started to protest automatically, then stopped herself. Why was she arguing? She didn't owe this man anything. Why would she mention me at all? Because I asked. Rowan stopped a few feet away, close enough that Clara could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. I wanted to know who actually runs this estate. The Caros claim to, but anyone with eyes can see they're incapable of managing a henhouse, let alone a property this size. Clara felt a dangerous flutter of something in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or hope. Both were equally foolish. I just do what I'm told, she said carefully. Liar. The word was soft, almost gentle, but it hit like a slap. Clara's eyes widened. Excuse me? You heard me. Rowan tilted his head, studying her. You rebuilt that fire in under 3 minutes using technique most servants wouldn't know. You didn't panic when I startled you. Your first instinct was to assess the situation before reacting. And you're standing here talking to me instead of running or groveling, which means you're either brave or foolish. Personally, I'm betting on brave. You don't know anything about me, Clara said, her voice sharper than she'd intended. No, Rowan agreed, but I'd like to. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Clara took a small step back, her mind racing. This was dangerous. Dukes didn't talk to servants like this, like they were people, like their opinions mattered, and they certainly didn't look at servants the way Rowan was looking at her now, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle and she was the missing piece. I should go, Clara said quietly. Madame Caro will be looking for me. Let her look. I can't. Why not? Rowan's voice hardened slightly. What will she do? Fire you? Clara almost laughed. Fire her. As if she were actually employed, as if she had a choice about being here. She's my guardian, Clara said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. She took me in when my parents died. I owe her everything. Rowan's expression shifted, something dark and knowing flickering across his features. Does she tell you that often? That you owe her? Clara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Rowan's jaw tightened. Let me guess. She reminds you every day that you're lucky to have a roof over your head, that you'd be nothing without her charity, that any misfortune that befalls this house is somehow your fault, your burden to bear. Clara's chest constricted. How did he know? How could he possibly know? I've seen it before, Rowan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. People like the Caros don't do anything out of kindness. They collect debts. They collect people. And they make damn sure you never forget what you owe them, so you'll never have the courage to leave. It doesn't matter, Clara whispered, hating how weak her voice sounded. It does. Why? The word burst out of her, sudden and fierce. Why does it matter to you? You don't know me. You don't know anything about my life. You're here for a season, maybe two, and then you'll leave and I'll still be here. Still invisible. Still… She cut herself off, breathing hard. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less intense. I know you're wasting it, he said. Your life, your intelligence, your strength. I can see it in your eyes, Clara. You're capable of so much more than this, but you've convinced yourself that survival is enough, that being invisible is the same as being safe. It is safe, Clara shot back. Safe keeps me alive. Does it? Rowan challenged. Or does it just keep you from living? Clara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Because he was right. She knew he was right. But admitting it, actually saying it out loud, would mean acknowledging that the last 18 years of her life had been nothing but a slow, suffocating surrender. And she wasn't ready for that. Rowan seemed to understand. He stepped back, giving her space, though his eyes never left hers. I'm not here to make your life harder, he said. I'm here because this estate has been in chaos for years, and I've been hired by the Ashford Family Trust to assess its financial viability. They're considering foreclosing on the Caros' debts, and I'm here to determine if it's worth saving. Clara's eyes widened. The Caros are in debt? Drowning in it, from what I can tell. Rowan's expression was grim. But the numbers don't add up. Money is disappearing from the accounts faster than it should be, even accounting for their extravagant lifestyle. Something is wrong here, Clara. And I think you already know that. She did. She'd seen the ledgers late at night when Madame Caro thought everyone was asleep, had glimpsed the rows of numbers that didn't make sense, the payments to names she didn't recognize, the shipments that arrived but were never recorded in the inventory logs. But she'd never said anything, because saying something meant risking everything. And Clara had learned long ago that girls like her didn't get second chances. I can't help you, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Can't or won't? Both. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. If the Caros find out I've been talking to you, if they even suspect I'm helping you investigate them, they'll throw me out. I have nothing, Rowan. No money, no family, no place to go. This house, as miserable as it is all I have. I can't risk it. Rowan's expression softened, but there was something else there too. Disappointment, maybe. Or pity. Then they've already won, he said quietly. The words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Rowan walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the vast library. He paused in the threshold, his back to her, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. When you're ready to stop hiding, he said without turning around, come find me. And then he was gone. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, a cramped room barely large enough for a cot and a single wooden chair, staring at the ceiling, Rowan's words echoing endlessly in her mind. You're wasting it. Was she? She'd spent so long surviving, keeping her head down, doing what she was told, making herself small and quiet and invisible, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond tomorrow, to fight for something, to believe she deserved something more than the scraps others threw her way. But what if Rowan was right? What if there was more to this than she'd ever dared to believe? What if she wasn't supposed to be invisible at all? The thought terrified her, because hoping meant risking, and risking meant losing, and losing meant ending up alone in the cold with nothing but regret for company. But wasn't that where she already was? Clara turned onto her side, pulling the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, rattling the window in its frame. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in the air, in the bite of the cold that seeped through every crack in the walls. She thought about Rowan's face, the way he'd looked at her. Not with pity, not with contempt, but with something she'd never seen before. Recognition, as if he saw her, really saw her, and didn't look away. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would find him and tell him, what? That she'd changed her mind? That she was willing to risk everything on the word of a man she'd just met? It was insane. It was terrifying. It was the first real choice she'd made in years. Morning came gray and bitter, the sky heavy with clouds that promised snow. Clara rose before dawn as always, washed in cold water from the basin in her room and dressed in the same plain gray dress she wore every day. It was wool, sturdy and shapeless, designed to be forgettable. She braided her dark hair tightly and pinned it at the base of her neck, then made her way downstairs to begin the day's work. The kitchen was already bustling, cook and her 2 assistants preparing breakfast for the Carrows and their guest. Clara slipped in quietly, taking her place at the scullery sink where a mountain of pots and pans from last night's dinner awaited her. Late night? Cook asked without looking up from the eggs she was beating. Couldn't sleep, Clara admitted. That Duke keeping you up? One of the assistants, a girl named Mary, giggled. He's handsome, isn't he? In a scary sort of way. Mary, Cook said sharply. Mind your tongue. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying, and it's not appropriate. The Duke is a guest in this house, and Clara is... Nobody, Clara finished quietly. Cook's face softened. I didn't mean... It's fine, Clara said quickly. She plunged her hands into the scalding water and began scrubbing. I know what I am. The kitchen fell silent except for the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the stove. Clara worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She'd made her decision last night, but now in the cold light of day, doubt crept back in. What did she really know about Rowan? Nothing, except that he was dangerous and he'd somehow seen through the armor of invisibility she'd spent years building. That alone should have been warning enough to stay away. But instead it made her want to move closer. Clara! Madame Carrow's voice rang through the house like a bell tolling disaster. Clara's hand stilled in the dishwater. She glanced at Cook, who gave her a sympathetic look. Best not keep her waiting, Cook murmured. Clara dried her hands and hurried toward the voice, her heart sinking with every step. She found Madame Carrow in the drawing room, pacing like a caged animal. Edmund lounged on the settee, looking bored, while Rowan stood by the window, his expression unreadable. There you are, Isolde snapped. Where have you been? The kitchen, madame. Helping with... I don't care. Isolde's eyes were wild, her face flushed with anger, or maybe fear. The Duke has requested a tour of the estate. You will accompany us and answer any questions he may have about the household operations. Clara's eyes darted to Rowan. His expression didn't change, but she caught the slightest glimmer of amusement in his gray eyes. Of course, madame, Clara said carefully. And you will speak only when spoken to, Isolde continued. You will not volunteer information. You will not offer opinions. You will simply answer what is asked of you. Am I clear? Yes, madame. Good. Isolde smoothed her dress, composing herself. Edmund, you will join us. Edmund groaned. Mother, must I? It's freezing outside, and you will join us, Isolde repeated, her voice ice. Edmund sighed dramatically, but heaved himself off the settee. They began the tour in the main hall, Rowan walking slowly through the space, his eyes taking in every detail. He asked about the paintings on the walls, the age of the furniture, the condition of the floors. Isolde answered with practiced charm, painting a picture of an estate lovingly maintained and carefully managed. It was all lies, of course. Clara could see Rowan knew it too. His questions became sharper, more specific. "And the East Wing?" he asked. "I noticed several rooms appear to be closed off." "Oh, those are simply storage," Isolde said quickly. "Old furniture, family heirlooms, nothing of interest." "May I see them?" Isolde's smile tightened. "I'm afraid the keys have been misplaced. We so rarely use those rooms." "Clara," Rowan said, turning to her suddenly, "you maintain the household. Where are the keys to the East Wing?" Clara's mouth went dry. Isolde's eyes bored into her like daggers. Clara swallowed hard. "There's a full set in the housekeeper's office." "Excellent," Rowan said. "Shall we?" "That won't be necessary," Isolde said, her voice rising slightly. "I assure you, there's nothing of value." "Then there's no harm in looking." Rowan's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Isolde's face went white, then red. "Edmund, go fetch the keys." Edmund looked like he'd rather die, but he slouched off toward the housekeeper's office. The silence that followed was suffocating. Isolde wouldn't look at Clara. Rowan stood perfectly still, waiting, his patience infinite. When Edmund returned with the keys, they made their way to the East Wing. The doors groaned as they opened, revealing rooms thick with dust and shadows. Rowan moved through them methodically, examining everything. The furniture draped in sheets, the paintings turned to face the walls, the trunks stacked in corners. "What's in those?" he asked, pointing to the trunks. "Just old things," Isolde said vaguely. "Documents, papers, nothing important." "Clara, open one." Clara's hand shook as she knelt beside the nearest trunk. The lock was rusty but gave way. She lifted the lid and froze. Inside were documents, hundreds of them. Deeds, contracts, letters, all bearing the Whitlock family seal. "What is this?" Rowan asked quietly. Isolde's face had gone ashen. "I told you, just old family papers." "The Whitlock family," Rowan said, his voice deadly calm. "The original owners of this estate, the family that supposedly died out decades ago." He looked at Clara. "Your family." Clara couldn't breathe. She stared at the papers, at the seal, a raven over a crescent moon, and something deep in her memory stirred. She'd seen that seal before, on a locket her mother used to wear, a locket that had disappeared after her parents died. "This is absurd," Isolde sputtered. "Clara she's nobody, just a Whitlock," Rowan finished. "Isn't she?" The world tilted. Clara looked up at Madame Caro, saw the guilt written across her face, and knew. It was all true. Every word. "You knew," Clara whispered. "All this time you knew who I was." Isolde's mask cracked. "You ungrateful little... I gave you a home. I fed you, clothed you." "You stole from her," Rowan said coldly. "You took in an orphan child, hid her true identity, and spent the last 18 years stealing her inheritance while keeping her as a servant in her own house." "You have no proof," Isolde hissed. Rowan held up one of the documents from the trunk. "This is a deed of ownership signed by Clara's father, naming her as sole heir to the Ravenmore estate upon his death. This document was never filed with the courts, which means, legally, ownership never transferred to you. You've been living here illegally for nearly 2 decades." Edmund made a strangled sound. "Mother, what did you do?" "Shut up, Edmund," Isolde whirled on her son. "This is all your fault. If you just married well, if you'd brought money into this family, instead of gambling it away, so you decided to steal from a child instead?" Rowan's voice could have frozen fire. Isolde's eyes blazed. "She was 5 years old. What was she going to do with an estate this size? She would have lost it anyway, squandered it, destroyed it. I saved it." "You destroyed it," Rowan corrected. "I've seen the financial records, Madame Caro. This estate is bleeding money because you've been siphoning funds for years, paying yourself a salary, selling off assets, running up debts in the estate's name while keeping Clara in the dark about her own inheritance." Clara felt like she was drowning. The room spun around her, the walls closing in. 18 years. 18 years of servitude, of humiliation, of being told she was nothing. And it had all been a lie. A calculated, vicious, unforgivable lie. "I want you out," Clara heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Both of you. Out of my house." Isolde laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You? You think you can just throw us out? You have nothing, Clara. No money, no connections, no idea how to run an estate. Without me, you'll lose everything within a year." "She'll have me." Everyone turned to look at Rowan. He stood beside Clara, solid and immovable, his eyes locked on Isolde. "I'll help her navigate the legal process. I'll connect her with estate managers, lawyers, accountants, and I'll personally ensure that every penny you've stolen is accounted for and repaid." Isolde's face contorted with rage. "You bastard! You think you can come into my house and—" "It's not your house," Rowan said softly. "It never was." For a moment, Clara thought Isolde might actually attack him. The older woman's hands clenched into fists, her whole body trembling with fury. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out of the room, Edmund scrambling after her. Clara stood frozen, staring at the documents scattered around the trunk. Her documents, her family's history, her legacy, hidden away in a dusty room like shameful secrets. "Clara," Rowan's voice was gentle. She looked up at him, and the concern in his eyes nearly broke her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would she do this? If she wanted the estate, why keep me here?" "Control," Rowan said quietly. "As long as you didn't know who you were, you couldn't challenge her. And as long as she kept you dependent on her, you'd never leave. She needed you invisible, Clara, because the moment you became visible, the moment you started asking questions, her entire world would collapse." And it had. Clara sank to her knees among the scattered papers, her hands shaking. She should have felt victorious, vindicated, free. Instead, she just felt hollow. Everything she'd believed about herself, about her place in the world, it had all been built on lies. And now those lies were gone, and she had no idea who she was supposed to be without them. "What do I do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Rowan knelt beside her, his large hand warm on her shoulder. "You fight," he said simply. "You take back what's yours, and you show them that the invisible girl they tried to bury was the strongest person in this house all along." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache. He believed in her. This man who barely knew her, who had no reason to care, believed she could do this. Maybe it was time she started believing it too. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Okay, tell me what to do." Rowan smiled, a real smile this time, warm and fierce and full of promise. "First, we secure these documents. Then we find a lawyer, and then—" His smile turned sharp. "Then we take everything from them. Every single thing." The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Rowan worked with ruthless efficiency, sending telegrams to lawyers in London, arranging for estate auditors to travel to Ravenmoor, and personally going through every piece of documentation they could find related to the estate's finances. Clara worked alongside him, surprised to discover she understood more than she'd thought. Years of watching, of listening to conversations she wasn't supposed to hear, of piecing together fragments of information. It had all added up to something valuable. She knew where the hidden ledgers were kept. She knew which merchants had been systematically overcharging the estate. She knew about the shipments that arrived at night and disappeared before morning. She knew everything, and for the first time in her life, that knowledge was power. Madame Caro tried to maintain control, but it was like watching a dam crumble. She ordered the servants not to speak to Rowan or Clara. Half of them quit on the spot, the other half ignored her. She tried to remove documents from the estate. Rowan had already made copies. She threatened legal action. Rowan's lawyers were already preparing their case. With each passing day, her grip weakened. Edmund, for his part, simply drank. Clara found him in the study one evening, surrounded by empty bottles, his face blotchy and red. "You've destroyed us," he slurred when he saw her. "My mother gave you everything, and you've destroyed us." Clara looked at him. This soft, weak man who'd watched her serve his family for 18 years and never once questioned whether it was right. and felt nothing but contempt. "Your mother stole everything," she said coldly. "I'm just taking it back." She left him there, crying into his whiskey. On the fourth day, Rowan called her to the library. "The lawyers have finished their preliminary review," he said, his expression serious. "Clara, sit down." She sat, her heart hammering. "How bad is it?" "Bad?" Rowan ran a hand through his hair. "The Carrows have run up debts totaling nearly £300,000. They've sold off portions of the estate lands, liquidated investments, and mortgaged the house itself multiple times. If we were to call in all debts immediately, the estate would have to be sold just to cover what's owed." Clara's stomach dropped. "So I'm inheriting debt?" "Massive debt," Rowan confirmed. "But here's the thing. Most of those debts were incurred fraudulently. The Carrows never had legal authority to mortgage or sell property that didn't belong to them, which means the debts might not be enforceable against you." "Might?" "It'll require litigation, years of it probably. And in the meantime, you'll need money to maintain the estate, pay the remaining staff, keep the creditors at bay." He trailed off, watching her carefully. Clara processed this slowly. "So even if I win, I lose?" "Not necessarily." Rowan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "There's another option. You could sell the estate to someone with the resources to manage the debt and the litigation. Someone who would give you a fair price and ensure the property is properly cared for." "Someone like you," Clara said quietly. Rowan didn't deny it. "Yes, the Ashford Family Trust is prepared to make an offer, a generous one, enough to set you up comfortably for life, with money left over to invest however you choose. You'd be free, Clara, completely free." It was a good offer, a smart offer, the kind of offer a rational person would accept without hesitation. Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out over the moors. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, she could see the village where she'd grown up, the church where her parents were buried, the market square where she used to walk with her mother, the whole life she'd lost and forgotten. "No," she said softly. Behind her, she heard Rowan shift. "Clara." "This is my home," she said, turning to face him. "It's the only thing I have left of my family, of who I was supposed to be. I know it's broken. I know it's buried in debt and scandal and years of mismanagement, but it's mine." Her voice strengthened. "And I'm not selling it." Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "Good," he said. Clara blinked. "Good? I just turned down a fortune." "You did," Rowan agreed. "But you also just proved you're exactly who I thought you were." He stood, crossing to stand in front of her. "Strong enough to fight for what's yours, brave enough to choose the hard path when the easy one is right there. That's not weakness, Clara. That's power." "Power that's about to bankrupt me," Clara said wryly. "Maybe. Or maybe we find another way." Rowan's expression turned thoughtful. "What if you didn't fight this alone?" "What do you mean?" "A partnership. You retain ownership of the estate, but I provide the financial backing and expertise to manage the debts and restore the property. We split the profits from any improvements or ventures. You maintain control over all major decisions, but you have resources and support." Clara's breath caught. "Why would you do that?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because I've spent the last 10 years watching powerful people destroy things that matter, because they can. And I'm tired of it." He met her eyes. "You could have taken the money and run, Clara. You could have let someone else clean up this mess. But you didn't. You chose to stay and fight. That's rare. That's worth protecting." Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest, something dangerous and terrifying and utterly undeniable. She wasn't falling for Rowan Ashford. She was already falling. "Okay," she said quietly. "Partners." Rowan's smile was like sunrise. "Partners?" He extended his hand. Clara took it. And in that moment, with their hands clasped and the dying light streaming through the windows, something shifted. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't just about the estate or the money or proving the Carrows wrong. This was about two people who'd been invisible in different ways, finding each other in the ruins and deciding to build something new, together. The confrontation came 2 days later. Madame Carrow had barricaded herself in the master suite, refusing to leave or speak to anyone. The lawyers Rowan had hired served her with eviction papers, notification of fraud charges, and a lawsuit seeking repayment of 18 years of stolen wages and damages. She ignored all of it. Until Clara walked into her room unannounced. Isolde was standing by the window, still dressed in black, her face haggard and drawn. She didn't turn when Clara entered. "Come to gloat?" Isolde asked, her voice flat. "No," Clara said honestly. "I came to understand." Now Isolde did turn. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smeared. Understand what? Why? Clara stepped further into the room, this room that should have been hers, this space she'd only ever entered to clean. Why you did this? Why you kept me here all these years? Was it just the money? Isolde laughed bitterly. Just the money, as if money were some small thing. It's not, Clara agreed, but neither is destroying a child's life to get it. I didn't destroy your life, Isolde's voice cracked. I saved it. You were 5 years old, Clara, 5. Your parents had just died in that carriage accident, and you had no other family, no one to care for you. You would have been sent to an orphanage. Do you know what happens to girls in orphanages? So you took me in out of kindness? Clara's voice was hard. I took you in because I was desperate. Isolde's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face. My husband had just lost everything in a failed investment. We were drowning in debt, on the verge of losing our home. And then I heard about the Whitlock estate, about the little girl who'd inherited it, and I thought... She stopped, breathing hard. I thought maybe there was a way to save us, save my son, by stealing from me. By taking care of you, Isolde insisted. I gave you food, shelter, safety. I could have thrown you out at any time, but I didn't. I kept you here, kept you fed and clothed and miserable, Clara finished. You kept me afraid. You kept me small. You convinced me I was worthless, so I'd never question why I was living like a servant in a house full of wealth. Her voice broke. You stole my childhood, Isolde. You stole my identity. You stole 18 years of my life, and you're standing here acting like I should be grateful. Isolde's face crumpled. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, small and pathetic and utterly insufficient. Clara felt something twist in her chest. Part of her wanted to rage, to scream, to make Isolde hurt the way she'd been hurt for so many years. But mostly, she just felt tired. I don't forgive you, Clara said quietly. I don't think I ever will. But I understand. She moved toward the door, then paused. You have 3 days to vacate the property. After that, the constables will remove you by force. Use the time wisely. She left without looking back. In the hallway, Rowan was waiting. He didn't ask what had happened. He just pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself break. She cried for the little girl she'd been, for the parents she barely remembered, for the years she'd lost and could never get back. And when the tears finally stopped, Rowan was still there, holding her steady. What happens now? Clara asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Now? Rowan pulled back just enough to look at her. Now we rebuild. Together. Clara nodded, taking a shaky breath. Together. She liked the sound of that. The Carows left on a gray morning that smelled of rain and endings. Clara watched from the library window as their carriage rolled down the long drive, packed with whatever belongings they could carry. Isolde sat rigid and silent, her face turned away from the house. Edmund slumped beside her, already half drunk, though it wasn't yet noon. They didn't look back. Clara waited until the carriage disappeared beyond the hill before she let herself breathe. The relief she'd expected didn't come. Instead, she felt hollow, like someone had carved out her insides and left only an echo where her heart used to be. They're gone, Rowan said quietly from the doorway. Clara nodded, but didn't turn. It doesn't feel real. It will. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Give it time. Time. As if she had any idea what to do with it now. For 18 years, her life had been defined by the Carows, by their demands, their cruelty, their presence. She'd woken every morning knowing exactly what was expected of her, exactly how small she needed to make herself to survive another day. Now that framework was gone, shattered like glass, and Clara had no idea who she was supposed to be without it. The estate managers arrive tomorrow, Rowan continued. They'll want to tour the property, review the finances, discuss immediate priorities. You should be prepared for difficult conversations. About the debt. About everything. Rowan's voice was gentle but honest. The next few months are going to be brutal, Clara. Every decision you make will be questioned. Every mistake magnified. There are people in the county who've already decided you're not capable of managing this place, and they're waiting for you to fail so they can swoop in and buy it for pennies. Clara finally turned to look at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know what you're walking into. His gray eyes were serious, concerned. I meant what I said about being partners, but that means being honest with each other, even when the truth is ugly. She appreciated that more than he probably knew. Everyone else in her life had lied to her, told her what they thought she needed to hear or what served their own interests. Rowan just told her the truth and trusted her to handle it. So what do I do? Clara asked. You fight, Rowan said simply. You prove them wrong, and you let me help you do it. Clara wanted to believe it would be that simple. It wasn't. The estate managers arrived the next day in a gleaming black carriage pulled by matched bay horses. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in expensive wool suits that probably cost more than Clara had ever owned in her entire life. The lead manager was a man named Harrison Blackwell, tall, thin, with silver hair, and the kind of sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. He looked at Clara the way someone might look at a stain on fine fabric, with mild distaste and the assumption that she'd be gone soon enough. Miss Whitlock, he said, his tone professionally polite but utterly dismissive, I understand you've recently come into your inheritance. The pause before come into was deliberate, loaded with skepticism. That's correct, Clara said, keeping her voice steady. And I understand you're here to assess the estate's financial position. Among other things, Blackwell's eyes swept over the entrance hall, cataloging every crack in the plaster, every worn patch in the carpet. The Ashford Family Trust has significant concerns about the property's viability. Our job is to determine whether it can be salvaged or whether it should be liquidated entirely. Clara's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. I see. Do you? Blackwell turned his sharp gaze back to her. Miss Whitlock, with all due respect, you're 23 years old with no education in estate management, no business experience, and no capital. This property requires hundreds of thousands of pounds in repairs and debt repayment. The odds of you successfully managing it are better than you think, Rowan cut in smoothly, appearing at Clara's side. Miss Whitlock has lived on this estate her entire life. She knows every inch of it, every system, every asset. That's worth more than any formal education. Blackwell's expression didn't change. Duke Ashford, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. I'm Miss Whitlock's partner in this venture, Rowan said, which means anything you need to discuss with her, you can discuss with both of us. The other 2 managers exchanged glances. The woman, whose name was Mrs. Catherine Price, stepped forward with a ledger tucked under her arm. Perhaps we should begin the assessment, she said diplomatically. Miss Whitlock, we'll need access to all financial records, property deeds, contracts, and correspondence related to the estate's operations over the past 20 years. 20 years. Which meant they'd see everything the Caros had done, every fraudulent transaction, every stolen penny, every shameful secret. Clara lifted her chin. Of course. I'll have everything brought to the study. Over the next 3 days, the managers tore through Ravenmore like a storm. They inspected every room, examined every piece of furniture, interviewed every remaining servant. They pored over ledgers until their eyes were bloodshot, cross-referencing transactions, tracking payments, building a complete picture of the estate's financial devastation. Clara sat through meeting after meeting, answering questions, explaining what she knew, admitting what she didn't. It was exhausting and humiliating in equal measure. Every gap in her knowledge, another mark against her, another reason for these cold-eyed professionals to doubt her capability. On the 4th day, Blackwell called a meeting in the study. Clara and Rowan sat on one side of the massive oak desk. The 3 managers sat on the other, their faces grim. The situation is worse than we anticipated, Blackwell began without preamble. The Caros have systematically looted this estate for nearly 2 decades. They've sold off productive farmland, liquidated valuable assets, and mortgaged the house itself multiple times using fraudulent documentation. The total debt currently stands at £347,000. The number hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd known it was bad, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. However, Mrs. Price continued, there is some good news. Many of those debts were incurred illegally and may not be enforceable against Miss Whitlock personally. We've already begun legal proceedings to challenge the most egregious fraudulent transactions. That will take years, the third manager, a man named Thomas Garrett, added, and cost a fortune in legal fees. How much? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Conservatively? 50,000 pounds, possibly more. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't have 50,000 pounds. She didn't have 50 pounds. The Ashford Family Trust is prepared to cover those costs, Rowan said firmly, as part of our partnership agreement. Blackwell's expression was skeptical. That's quite generous, Your Grace. What exactly do you get out of this arrangement? A functional estate instead of a ruin, Rowan replied coolly, and a partner who's willing to do the hard work of rebuilding instead of simply selling to the highest bidder. Seems like a fair trade to me. Blackwell didn't look convinced, but he moved on. Even with the legal challenges, the estate still faces immediate financial pressure. There are creditors demanding payment, staff who need wages, maintenance that can't be deferred. We estimate you'll need at least 10,000 pounds in liquid capital just to keep things running for the next 6 months. I can provide that, Rowan said. And after 6 months? Mrs. Price asked. The estate needs to generate income, Miss Whitlock. Real, sustainable income. Do you have any ideas how to accomplish that? Clara's mind raced. The estate had farmland, but most of the productive acres had been sold off. There were tenant cottages, but half of them were empty, and the rest barely paid enough rent to cover their own maintenance. The house itself was enormous but deteriorating, hardly the kind of property that could be profitably rented. I don't know, Clara admitted, hating how weak she sounded. Not yet. The managers exchanged looks that said everything they didn't need to speak aloud. She's not capable. She's going to fail. This is a waste of time. Perhaps, Blackwell said carefully, it would be prudent to consider the Duke's original offer to purchase the property outright. You'd walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life, and the estate would be in hands capable of managing it properly. No, Clara said immediately. Miss Whitlock, I said no. Clara stood, her hands pressed flat against the desk. I understand the situation looks impossible. I understand you think I'm too young, too inexperienced, too much of a risk. But this is my home, my family's legacy, and I'm not selling it just because the path forward is difficult. Blackwell leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sharp, calculating eyes. Very well. But understand, the trust will not continue supporting this venture indefinitely. If we don't see significant progress within 6 months, we'll revisit the question of liquidation, whether you want to or not. It was a threat wrapped in professional courtesy. Clara met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll make sure you see progress. After the managers left, Clara stood alone in the study, her hands shaking with a combination of fear and fury. 6 months. She had 6 months to turn around an estate that had been systematically destroyed over 2 decades. 6 months to prove she was capable of something she'd never been taught how to do. 6 months to succeed where everyone expected her to fail. It was impossible. You handled that well. Clara turned to find Rowan leaning against the doorframe, watching her with something like approval in his eyes. I handled that terribly, Clara corrected. I had no answers, no plan, nothing but stubborn refusal to give up. That's not competence, Rowan. That's just pride. Sometimes pride is all you need to get started. He crossed the room to stand beside her. The plan comes later, once you've committed to fighting. And what if I can't think of a plan? Clara's voice cracked. What if they're right? What if I'm not capable of this? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he took her hand, his grip warm and solid. Do you remember what you told me that first night in the library? He asked. When I asked why you stayed invisible for so long? Clara nodded. I said it kept me safe. And I said it kept you from living. Rowan's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Clara, you've spent your entire life being told you're not enough. Not smart enough, not worthy enough, not capable enough. But that was never true. It was just a lie designed to keep you powerless. Then why does it still feel true? Clara whispered. Because believing lies is easier than risking the truth. Rowan stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. But you've already taken the hardest step. You've claimed what's yours. Now you just have to defend it. How? By doing what you've always done. His voice was fierce, certain. By surviving, by adapting, by being smarter and tougher than everyone who's betting against you. Clara wanted to believe him, but belief required hope, and hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, she nodded. Because what else could she do? Give up? Sell the estate and walk away? That would be safer, easier. But Clara was done with safe and easy. The first real crisis came 2 weeks later. Clara was working in the estate office, trying to make sense of the tangled mess of accounts the Caros had left behind, when Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper and one of the few servants who'd stayed, knocked urgently on the door. "Miss Whitlock, you need to come quickly." Clara's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "There's a crowd at the front gate. Merchants from the village. They're demanding payment for debts the Caros ran up before they left." Clara's blood ran cold. She'd known this was coming, had seen the unpaid invoices stacked in the office, the bills marked overdue in angry red ink, but she'd hoped to have more time before the creditors came calling. She found Rowan in the stables, and together they hurried to the main gate. A crowd of at least 20 people had gathered, shopkeepers, tradesmen, farmers, all holding papers and wearing expressions ranging from desperate to furious. At the front stood a heavy-set man in a stained apron whom Clara recognized as the village butcher. "There she is," he called when he saw Clara approaching. "The new mistress of Ravenmoor." The title sounded like an accusation. Clara stopped a few feet from the gate, very aware of all the eyes on her. "Mr. Dobson, what can I do for you?" "You can pay what you owe," Dobson said bluntly. He thrust a paper through the gate bars. £300 for meat delivered over the past year, never paid for, never even acknowledged. "I have invoices too," another man called out. The blacksmith, Clara thought. £200 for repairs and horseshoes. "Fabric and thread," a woman added. £150. "Grain and feed, wine and spirits, coal and lamp oil." The numbers piled up, each one another weight on Clara's chest. She took the papers they shoved at her, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand you're owed payment," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But these debts were incurred by the previous occupants of the estate, not by me. I've only just learned of their existence." "Don't matter who incurred them," Dobson shot back. "You own the estate now, which means you own the debts." "That's not how it works," Rowan said quietly, stepping forward. "Debts incurred through fraud don't automatically transfer to new ownership." "Fraud?" The blacksmith's face reddened. "I delivered goods in good faith. I trusted the Caros to pay." "And they betrayed that trust," Rowan agreed. "But that doesn't make Miss Whitlock responsible." "So we just lose everything?" A woman near the back was crying now. "My family's been waiting on that payment for months. We can't afford to just write it off." Clara's heart ached. These weren't wealthy creditors who could absorb the loss. These were working people who'd extended credit because they'd believed the Caros were good for it. Now they were facing real hardship because of someone else's greed. "I want to pay you," Clara said honestly. "But I don't have the money. The estate is drowning in debt, far more than what's owed to you. I'm working with estate managers and lawyers to sort through everything, but it's going to take time." "Time don't put food on the table," Dobson said harshly. "I know." Clara stepped closer to the gate, meeting his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were lied to. I'm sorry you're suffering because of the Caros' greed, but I'm not them. I'm trying to fix this, but I need your patience." "Patience?" Dobson laughed bitterly. "From where I'm standing, you look just like them. Rich girl in a big house, making excuses while the rest of us starve." The words hit Clara like a slap. "I'm not rich. I've been living as a servant in that house for 18 years while the Caros stole everything that should have been mine. I have as much reason to hate them as you do." "Then prove it," the blacksmith challenged. "Prove you're different." "How?" The crowd went silent, waiting. Clara's mind raced. What could she offer them? She had no money, no assets she could liquidate, no way to pay what was owed. All she had was the estate itself. An idea sparked, crazy and desperate, but maybe just possible. What if Clara said slowly. Instead of money, I offered you land. The crowd stirred, confused murmurs rippling through it. Land, Dobson repeated skeptically. The estate has tenant cottages and small parcels of farmland that aren't currently productive, Clara explained, the plan taking shape as she spoke. What if I transferred ownership of those properties to you, proportional to what you're owed? You'd own the land outright, could farm it, rent it, sell it, whatever you choose. Rowan's hand found her elbow, his grip tight with warning. Clara. She ignored him, her eyes locked on the crowd. I know it's not the same as cash, but it's something real, something that could provide long-term value instead of just a one-time payment. The merchants exchanged glances, calculating, considering. What's the catch? The blacksmith asked suspiciously. No catch, Clara said. Just a request. Give me 6 months to get the estate back on its feet. If I succeed, the land values will increase and you'll profit. If I fail, you'll own property free and clear while the rest gets liquidated. And what do you get out of this? Dobson wanted to know. Breathing room, Clara admitted. Time to fix what the Caros broke without creditors hammering at the door every day. It was a gamble. She was giving away pieces of her inheritance to people who had no reason to trust her, betting everything on the possibility that she could somehow turn the estate around in 6 months. But she didn't have better options. I need time to think, Dobson said finally. Fair enough. Clara nodded. Come back in 3 days? I'll have the legal paperwork drawn up, and we can discuss the specifics. The crowd began to disperse, still muttering amongst themselves, but less angry now. Hopeful, maybe, or at least curious enough to wait and see what happened. When they were gone, Rowan turned to Clara with an expression somewhere between admiration and exasperation. That was either brilliant or insane, he said. Probably both. Clara's legs felt weak. She leaned against the gate, her heart hammering. Did I just make a terrible mistake? I don't know, Rowan said honestly. But you gave them hope, and you bought yourself time. That's not nothing. Clara nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. She'd just promised to give away parts of the estate, parts she might desperately need later. What if she'd just traded short-term relief for long-term catastrophe? But what choice did she have? Come on, Rowan said gently, taking her arm. Let's get you inside. You look like you're about to collapse. They'd barely made it back to the house when Mrs. Brennan met them in the entrance hall, her face pale. Miss Whitlock, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent. Clara's exhaustion deepened. Who is it? Lord Pemberton, miss, from Blackmore Hall. Clara's blood ran cold. Lord Pemberton was one of the wealthiest landowners in the county, a man whose estates dwarfed Ravenmore, whose political connections reached all the way to Parliament. She'd never met him, but she'd heard the servants whisper about him in tones of fear and respect. What could he possibly want with her? She found him in the drawing room, standing with his back to the door, examining a painting on the wall. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps 60, with iron gray hair and the kind of upright bearing that spoke of military training in his youth. When he turned, his eyes were cold blue chips of ice. Miss Whitlock, he said, his voice clipped and precise. How good of you to see me. Lord Pemberton. Clara kept her voice steady despite her nerves. What brings you to Ravenmore? Concern. He clasped his hands behind his back. I've been hearing troubling reports about this estate. Fraud, debt, mismanagement. It reflects poorly on the county as a whole. I'm working to address those issues, Clara said carefully. Are you? Pemberton's eyebrows rose. From what I understand, you've just promised to give away estate property to settle debts you claim aren't your responsibility. That's not management, Miss Whitlock. That's desperation. Clara's hands clenched into fists. How did you— I have interests in the village, Pemberton said coolly. When something significant happens, I hear about it. And what you propose today is very significant indeed. It's a creative solution to a difficult problem, Rowan said from the doorway. Clara hadn't realized he'd followed her. Pemberton's eyes flicked to him. Duke Ashford, I'd heard you were involving yourself in this situation. Miss Whitlock is my partner, Rowan said evenly. Her success is my success. How noble. Pemberton's tone suggested he thought it was anything but. However, I'm not here to debate estate management philosophy. I'm here to make Miss Whitlock an offer. Clara's stomach tightened. What kind of offer? A generous one. Pemberton pulled a folded document from his coat. I'm prepared to purchase Ravenmore Estate for £400,000. That's more than enough to cover all outstanding debts, with a substantial sum left over for you to live comfortably. It was more than Rowan had offered, more than she'd dared dream the estate might be worth in its current state. It was also a trap. Clara could see it in Pemberton's eyes, the cold calculation, the certainty that she'd accept. He thought she was weak, desperate, ready to fold at the first real offer. Why? Clara asked bluntly. Why do you want this estate? Does it matter? Pemberton countered. The price is fair, more than fair, considering the circumstances. It matters to me. Pemberton's expression hardened. Very well. Ravenmore borders my eastern holdings. Consolidating the properties would be, convenient. Convenient. That was one word for it. Clara suspected the truth was more complicated, that Pemberton saw an opportunity to expand his already considerable power, to snap up a vulnerable estate at a discount price despite his generous offer. Thank you for the offer, Clara said carefully. But I'm not interested in selling. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. Don't be foolish, girl. You're in over your head. This estate is a sinking ship, and you're the only one who doesn't see it. Then I'll go down with it, Clara said, lifting her chin. But I'm not abandoning it while there's still a chance to save it. There is no chance. Pemberton's voice turned hard. You're a child playing at estate management with no resources, no experience, and no allies beyond a duke who'll lose interest the moment something shinier catches his eye. You will fail, Miss Whitlock. And when you do, I'll still be here, but my offer will be considerably lower. Is that a threat? Rowan asked quietly, but there was steel in his voice. It's a prediction. Pemberton tucked the document back into his coat. Based on cold, hard reality. But if Miss Whitlock prefers to learn through painful experience, that's her choice. He moved toward the door, pausing beside Clara. One more thing, he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I knew your parents. Your father was a good man, smart, honorable, too idealistic for his own good. He died believing the world was fair, that hard work and integrity mattered. I'd hate to see his daughter learn the same hard lesson he did. Before Clara could respond, he was gone. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Clara stood frozen, her mind reeling. What had he meant by that? Had he been trying to warn her? Threaten her? Both? Clara. Rowan's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I don't know. She turned to face him, feeling suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Am I making a mistake? Should I just take his money and walk away? Do you want to? No. The answer came immediately, from some deep place inside her that hadn't yet learned to doubt. But I'm scared, Rowan. Scared I'm being stubborn when I should be smart. Scared I'm dragging you down with me. Scared that Pemberton is right and I'm just too proud to see it. Rowan crossed the room and took her hands, his grip warm and solid. Fear is reasonable, he said, but don't let it make your decisions for you. You fought too hard to give up now. Clara wanted to believe him, but doubt had sunk its claws deep. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the empty halls of Ravenmore, her footsteps echoing on the worn floors. The house felt different now, less like a prison, but not yet like a home. Just a vast, uncertain space full of ghosts and possibilities in equal measure. She ended up in the library, standing in front of the fireplace where she'd first spoken to Rowan. It felt like a lifetime ago, though barely a month had passed. Can't sleep either? Clara turned to find Rowan in the doorway, dressed in shirt sleeves and dark trousers, his hair disheveled. Too much to think about, she admitted. He crossed the room to stand beside her, both of them staring into the cold fireplace. Want to talk about it? What if I'm wrong? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. What if everyone who's betting against me is right? What if I'm not strong enough, smart enough, good enough to save this place? Then you'll fail, Rowan said simply, and the world will keep turning. Clara looked at him, startled. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you stop treating failure like death. Rowan turned to face her fully. Clara, you're allowed to fail. You're allowed to try something and have it not work. That doesn't make you weak or foolish or unworthy. It just makes you human. Easy for you to say. You're a duke. You have money, power, connections. If you fail, you have a safety net. Do I? Rowan's smile was bitter. I was exiled from my family, Clara. Cast out for refusing to marry a woman I didn't love and take over estates I didn't want. I spent 10 years building a life on my own terms. And you know what I learned? Failure is only permanent if you let it be. Clara studied his face, seeing for the first time the shadows behind his eyes. Why did you really come here? To Ravenmore? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. Because I'm tired of watching powerful people destroy things that matter. Because I'm tired of playing by rules designed to keep people like you invisible and people like the Caros in power. Because when I met you, this woman who'd survived 18 years of abuse and still had the courage to fight back, I thought maybe I could be part of something that actually meant something. His eyes met hers, intense and unflinching. I'm not here out of pity, Clara. I'm here because I believe in you, and maybe because I need you to succeed as much as you need to. Something shifted in Clara's chest. A wall crumbling, a door opening, a truth she'd been avoiding finally demanding to be acknowledged. She was falling in love with him. Maybe had been since that first night, when he'd looked at her like she was worth seeing. Rowan, she whispered. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Yeah? Thank you, for believing in me when no one else did. Always, he said softly, and then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, giving her room to pull away if she wanted. But Clara didn't want to pull away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with all the desperate hope and terrified courage she'd been carrying for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. We're going to make this work, he said fiercely. I don't know how yet, but we will. Clara wanted to believe him, and for the first time in her life, she actually did. The next morning brought news that shattered whatever fragile hope Clara had been building. Mrs. Brennan woke her before dawn, her face ashen. Miss Whitlock, you need to come. Now. Clara dressed quickly and followed the housekeeper downstairs, her heart hammering. They went outside toward the eastern fields where a group of servants and farmhands had gathered. What Clara saw made her blood run cold. The fields, 20 acres of winter wheat that should have been ready to harvest in another month, were destroyed. Not by weather or blight, but deliberately. Someone had ridden through them in the night, trampling the crops, cutting down what they couldn't crush, leaving nothing but ruined earth. Who did this? Clara asked, her voice shaking. Don't know, miss, one of the farmhands said. We heard horses around midnight, but by the time we got out here, they were gone. Clara walked into the ruined field, her boots sinking into the torn earth. This wheat represented months of work, thousands of pounds in potential income. Income she desperately needed. Now it was gone. Rowan appeared beside her, his face dark with fury. This was deliberate. I know. Clara's voice was hollow. Pemberton, Rowan said grimly. It has to be, warning you what happens if you don't sell. Clara wanted to argue, to insist that even Pemberton wouldn't stoop to something so cruel. But she couldn't. Because she'd seen the cold calculation in his eyes yesterday, the absolute certainty that she would fail. Maybe he'd decided to help that failure along. What do I do? Clara asked, feeling the weight of it all crushing down on her. Rowan took her hand, his grip fierce. You don't give up. You document this, report it to the magistrate, and you keep fighting. Fighting what? Clara's voice cracked. I can't fight someone with Pemberton's power. If he wants me gone, he'll find a way to make it happen. Not if you make yourself too valuable to destroy. Clara looked at him confused. How? By succeeding, Rowan said simply. By proving that Ravenmore under your management is worth more than Ravenmore as part of his empire. By making the county see you not as a weak girl who inherited more than she can handle, but as a force they can't afford to dismiss. It sounded impossible. But then again, everything about the last month had seemed impossible, and Clara was still standing, barely. Okay, she said quietly. Tell me how. Rowan's smile was fierce and full of promise. We start by showing them what you're really made of. Rowan's plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. If Clara wanted to prove herself to the county, she needed to do something none of them expected, something bold enough to force them to see her differently. The destroyed wheat field had cost her income she desperately needed, but it had also given her something potentially more valuable: clarity. She couldn't play by the old rules. The old rules were designed to keep people like her powerless, so she'd have to write new ones. "The autumn market fair is in 3 weeks," Rowan said as they stood in his makeshift office, what had once been a dusty storage room now converted into a war room, covered with maps, ledgers, and plans. "Every landowner in the county will be there, including Pemberton. It's your chance to make a statement." Clara studied the map of the fairground spread across the table. What kind of statement? The kind that shows you're not just surviving, you're thriving. Rowan's finger traced a path through the market stalls. "We'll take a booth. Display the estate's goods, preserved fruits, honey from the hives, wool from the sheep. Show them Ravenmore is productive despite everything the Carrows did to it." "That's not enough," Clara said quietly. "A market booth won't change minds. They'll just see it as a desperate attempt to drum up business." "You're right." Rowan straightened, his gray eyes intense. "Which is why we're going to do something else. Something they can't ignore." He pulled out another document, a proposal he'd been working on for days. Clara read it twice, her heart hammering harder with each pass. "This is insane," she breathed. "Probably," Rowan agreed. "But it's also the only move that changes the game." The proposal was audacious. Clara would host a harvest dinner at Ravenmore on the night of the autumn fair, a formal event inviting every landowner, magistrate, and person of influence in the county. She'd serve food from the estate, wine from the cellars, and she'd give a speech laying out her vision for Ravenmore's future. It was a declaration of legitimacy, a challenge, a refusal to hide anymore. "They'll tear me apart," Clara said. "Maybe," Rowan acknowledged, "or maybe they'll finally see what I see, someone worth respecting." Clara wanted to believe it, but the doubt that had lived in her chest for so long whispered that this was exactly the kind of pride that preceded catastrophic falls. Still, she nodded. "Let's do it." The next 3 weeks were chaos. Clara threw herself into preparations with a desperation that bordered on mania. She worked 16-hour days organizing the estate's resources, coordinating with the remaining staff, personally overseeing every detail of the harvest dinner planning. The preserved fruits came from the kitchens where she'd spent years working unnoticed. The honey came from hives she'd helped maintain. The wool came from sheep she'd helped shear every spring since she was 10 years old. Every piece of the estate she was showcasing, she knew intimately, not as an owner, but as someone who'd kept it running while the Carrows took credit. Now it was hers to claim. But claiming it meant facing the people who still saw her as the invisible servant girl who'd gotten above her station. The first test came when Clara went to the village to personally invite the merchants she'd offered land to. She found them gathered at the inn, and the moment she walked in, the conversation died. Dobson the butcher stood up slowly, his expression wary. "Miss Whitlock, didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to invite you personally," Clara said, keeping her voice steady despite the weight of all those watching eyes. "To the harvest dinner at Ravenmore. 3 weeks from Saturday." The silence stretched painful and long. "Bit presumptuous, isn't it?" someone muttered from the back. "Hosting a fancy dinner when you can't even pay your debts?" "The dinner is part of showing how I plan to pay them," Clara replied evenly. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a chance to prove the estate can be profitable again." "By giving us land you might need later?" Dobson challenged. "Sounds like robbing Peter to pay Paul." "It sounds like creative problem solving," Clara corrected, "which is what's required when you inherit a disaster and refuse to give up on it." A woman near the window, Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the general store, spoke up. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't harvest crops or pay mortgages." "No," Clara agreed. "Hard work does. Intelligence does. Refusing to quit when everyone expects you to fail does." She met Mrs. Fletcher's eyes. "I've been doing that my entire life. The only difference now is people are finally watching." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "You really think you can turn that place around?" "I think I'm going to die trying," Clara said honestly, "and I'd rather die fighting than live defeated." The room was quiet for a beat. Then Dobson grunted. "Fair enough." We'll come to your dinner. But don't expect us to pretend everything's fine if it's not. I wouldn't dream of it, Clara said. She left the inn with her heart racing but her head high. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a door cracked open, and that was more than she'd had before. The second test came 3 days later when the magistrate arrived at Ravenmoor unannounced. Sir Reginald Thornby was a portly man in his 50s with a red face and suspicious eyes. He'd been appointed by Pemberton's political allies, which meant he was unlikely to be sympathetic to Clara's cause. "Miss Whitlock," he said when Clara met him in the drawing room, "I've received a complaint regarding the destruction of your wheat field." Clara's pulse jumped. "I filed that report myself 2 weeks ago. Have you identified who's responsible?" "That's what I'm here to discuss." Thornby pulled out a notebook. "You claim the damage was deliberate, an act of vandalism or sabotage. But I've investigated the scene, and I'm not convinced." Clara's blood ran cold. "What do you mean you're not convinced? The crops were systematically destroyed. That doesn't happen by accident." "Could have been wild animals," Thornby said with a shrug. "Deer, perhaps, or damaged by unusual weather patterns." "Deer don't cut wheat stalks with blades," Clara said, her voice tight with anger. "And there was no storm that night. Nevertheless, without clear evidence of human involvement, I can't pursue this as a criminal matter." Thornby closed his notebook with an air of finality. "I suggest you accept the loss and move on." "Move on," Clara repeated flatly. "Just like that." "These things happen in farming, Miss Whitlock. You'll learn to expect setbacks." It wasn't incompetence making Thornby dismiss her complaint. It was corruption. Someone had gotten to him, convinced him to look the other way. And Clara had a very good idea who. "Sir Reginald," she said carefully, "did Lord Pemberton speak to you about this matter?" Thornby's face flushed. "Lord Pemberton is a respected member of this community. If he had concerns about your allegations, he'd be well within his rights to express them." "Did he express them?" Clara pressed. "This interview is concluded," Thornby said stiffly, standing up. "Good day, Miss Whitlock." After he left, Clara stood alone in the drawing room, shaking with fury and fear in equal measure. Pemberton wasn't just trying to buy her out or intimidate her into selling. He was actively working to undermine her, sabotaging her crops, corrupting the magistrate, making sure she had no legal recourse or protection, and there was nothing she could do about it. "He's more dangerous than we thought," Rowan said when she told him what had happened. They were in the estate office, the door closed, speaking in low voices as if the walls themselves might betray them. "He owns the magistrate," Clara said bitterly. "Probably owns half the county officials. How do I fight that?" "You don't fight it head on," Rowan said grimly. "You go around it. You make yourself so publicly visible, so obviously legitimate, that he can't destroy you without exposing himself." The harvest dinner. Exactly. Rowan's jaw was tight. "We make it the event of the season. We show everyone in the county that Ravenmoor isn't some failing estate run by an incompetent girl. It's a viable operation run by someone who deserves respect. And if they don't believe it," Rowan's eyes were fierce, "then we make them believe it. But belief required more than a good dinner and a rousing speech. It required proof, which is why, 1 week before the harvest dinner, Clara made a decision that would either save her or destroy her completely. She went to see the tenants. Ravenmoor still had 12 tenant families living in cottages scattered across the estate, farmers who paid rent to work small parcels of land. Under the Carrows, they'd been ignored, overtaxed, and treated like expendable resources. Clara intended to change that. She visited each cottage personally, sitting at their tables, drinking their tea, listening to their stories. She learned about the repairs they desperately needed, the tools they lacked, the children they were trying to feed on wages that barely covered rent. And then she made them an offer. "What if," Clara said at the home of Thomas Ridley, a tenant farmer with 6 children and a wife who looked 20 years older than she probably was, "instead of paying rent in money, you paid it in production?" Ridley's weathered face was skeptical. "How do you mean?" "You keep 60% of what you grow," Clara explained. "The estate takes 40%. No cash rent, no arbitrary fees. You produce, you profit. The estate profits. Everyone has skin in the game." That's unheard of," Mrs. Ridley whispered. "No landowner offers terms like that." I'm not like other landowners, Clara said quietly. I've been powerless my entire life. I know what it's like to work yourself to exhaustion and still have nothing to show for it. I don't want that for you. Ridley exchanged a long look with his wife. You're serious about this? Completely. And if we fail, if the crops don't come in, then we all suffer together, Clara said honestly. But we also succeed together. That's the deal. It took 2 more days of negotiation, but eventually all 12 tenant families agreed. The news spread through the village like wildfire. Some saw it as visionary, others as foolish desperation. But Clara didn't care what they thought. She cared that she'd just turned 12 struggling families into 12 invested partners. They'd work harder because they had real stake in the outcome. And if Ravenmore succeeded, they'd succeed with it. It was a gamble. Everything she did now was a gamble. But she was done playing it safe. The day of the harvest dinner arrived gray and cold, with clouds that threatened rain but didn't deliver. Clara spent the morning in a state of controlled panic, checking and rechecking every detail. The dining hall had been transformed, cleaned, polished, decorated with autumn flowers and candles that cast warm light over the long tables. The kitchen staff had worked miracles with limited resources, preparing dishes that showcased the estate's best. Roasted duck with cherry sauce, root vegetables glazed with honey, bread made from their own wheat stores, and wines from the cellars that the Caros had somehow failed to sell off. It looked like prosperity. Whether it was real or elaborate theater remained to be seen. Clara dressed carefully in a gown she'd had made from fabric bought months ago. Deep green wool that complemented her dark hair and made her look older, more authoritative. She studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not invisible anymore. Terrified, but visible. You look beautiful, Rowan said from the doorway. Clara turned to find him dressed in formal evening wear, black coat, crisp white shirt, his hair tamed for once. He looked every inch the duke he was, powerful and refined and completely out of place in her shabby bedroom. I look like I'm pretending to be something I'm not, Clara said. You look like exactly what you are, Rowan corrected, crossing to stand in front of her. The rightful owner of this estate. A woman who's fought for every inch of ground she's gained. Someone worth respecting. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and Clara leaned into the touch, drawing strength from his certainty even as her own wavered. What if this doesn't work? She whispered. Then we try something else, Rowan said simply. But Clara, this is going to work. I know it. She wished she had his confidence. The guests began arriving at sunset. Clara stood in the entrance hall with Rowan beside her, greeting each arrival with a calm she didn't feel. The merchants came first. Dobson, Mon, and Mrs. Fletcher, and the blacksmith, all dressed in their Sunday best and looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. Then came the smaller landowners, the minor gentry, people who owned enough to matter but not enough to intimidate. And finally, fashionably late, came the real power players. Lord Pemberton arrived in a gleaming carriage, dressed in expensive black wool with a silver-headed cane he didn't need. His eyes swept over Clara with cold assessment, and she saw the exact moment he dismissed her efforts as futile. Miss Whitlock, he said smoothly, what an ambitious undertaking. Thank you for coming, Lord Pemberton, Clara replied, her voice steady. I wouldn't have missed it, Pemberton said, and the way he said it sounded like a threat. Behind him came the magistrate, Sir Thornby, and several other county officials Clara recognized from distance but had never met. They looked at her like she was a curiosity, an oddity to be studied and discussed but never taken seriously. Clara's hands clenched into fists hidden in the folds of her dress. When everyone was assembled in the dining hall, Clara took her place at the head of the table with Rowan at her right hand. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came after. Clara stood, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. I know many of you have questions about my ability to manage this estate. I know some of you think I'm too young, too inexperienced, too much of a risk, and honestly, those concerns aren't entirely unfounded. A murmur ran through the crowd. Rowan's hand found hers under the table, squeezing once in support. I didn't grow up learning estate management, Clara continued. I grew up as a servant in this house, working for people who were systematically destroying it while lying to me about who I was. Everything I know about Ravenmore, I learned from the ground up, literally. I've worked these fields, tended these animals, maintained these buildings, not as an owner, but as someone who had no choice. She paused, letting that sink in. But that experience taught me something valuable. It taught me that estates don't run on money and titles. They run on work, on people who care enough to show up every day and do what needs doing, and I've been doing that my entire life. Clara's eyes swept across the room, meeting skeptical gazes one by one. I'm not asking you to trust me because of my bloodline or my inheritance. I'm asking you to trust me because I've proven I can survive anything. The Caros tried to break me for 18 years and failed. This estate's debts and problems won't break me either. Pretty words, Pemberton said, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. But words don't pay creditors or harvest crops. No, they don't, Clara agreed, turning to face him directly, which is why I've restructured the tenant agreements to create shared investment in the estate's success, which is why I've negotiated land transfers to settle debts with local merchants, which is why I'm working with the Ashford Family Trust to fund legal challenges against fraudulent debts while maintaining operational solvency. She held Pemberton's gaze, refusing to look away. I'm not playing at this, Lord Pemberton. I'm building something real, something sustainable, something that will benefit this entire community if given the chance to succeed. And if you fail, Pemberton challenged, if your naive restructuring and desperate gambits don't work, what happens to the people who've tied their fortunes to yours? Then I'll fail having tried everything I could, Clara said quietly, which is more than the Caros ever did. They failed through greed and negligence while blaming everyone else. If I go down, it'll be fighting, and I'll make damn sure the people who trusted me don't go down with me. The room was utterly silent. Then, unexpectedly, Dobson stood up. I'll vouch for that. She offered me land when she didn't have to, structured it fair when she could have screwed me over. That's more integrity than I've seen from most so-called gentlefolk. Mrs. Fletcher rose next. She came to the village herself, didn't send servants or proxies, looked us in the eye and asked for a chance. That takes courage. One by one, the merchants stood. The blacksmith, the grain merchant, the baker. A wall of working-class solidarity that meant more than any aristocratic endorsement could have. Clara's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't afford to show. Not yet. Pemberton's face had gone hard as stone. How touching. The peasants have found their champion. His voice dripped contempt. But championing the lower classes won't save your estate, Miss Whitlock. You need capital. You need connections. You need things you don't have and can't get. She has me, Rowan said, his voice cutting through Pemberton's condescension like a blade. And the full backing of the Ashford Family Trust. That's capital and connections enough for anyone. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. For now, perhaps. But how long will your interest last, Your Grace? How long before you tire of this project and move on to something more rewarding? It was a pointed question, one designed to sow doubt about Rowan's commitment, about Clara's ability to hold his attention. Rowan stood, moving to stand beside Clara. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in full view of everyone assembled. I'm not going anywhere, Rowan said clearly. Clara and I are partners, in business and in everything else. What's hers is mine. What's mine is hers. We stand or fall together. The declaration rippled through the room like a stone in still water. Clara's heart stopped. She turned to look at Rowan, seeing something in his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. This wasn't just political theater. This was real. He was claiming her publicly, irrevocably, in a way that changed everything. Pemberton recovered first, his voice sharp. How convenient. A failed duchess-to-be finds a desperate estate owner, and suddenly there's a partnership. Forgive me if I remain skeptical. Remain whatever you like, Rowan said coolly. Your opinion doesn't change reality. Ravenmore is going to succeed. Clara is going to succeed. And you're going to have to find another estate to add to your collection. Pemberton's face went white, then red. You arrogant. Careful, Rowan warned softly, but there was steel underneath. You're in her house now. Show some respect. For a moment, Clara thought Pemberton might actually explode. His hand gripped his cane so tightly his knuckles went white. His jaw clenched with barely suppressed rage. Then he forced a cold smile. Of course. Forgive me, Miss Whitlock. I'm afraid I let my concern for the county's welfare override my manners. It was the worst kind of apology, one that sounded right but meant nothing. Clara inclined her head gracefully. Apology accepted, Lord Pemberton. Please, everyone, sit. Let's enjoy the meal. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Lines had been drawn, alliances declared, battle positions established. Clara moved through the rest of the evening in a strange daze, accepting congratulations from some guests, enduring cold stares from others, all while processing what Rowan had just done. He'd tied himself to her completely, publicly, in a way that would have consequences for both of them. When the last guest finally left and the staff began cleaning up, Clara found herself alone with Rowan in the now empty dining hall. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. Rowan turned to face her, his expression serious. "I told the truth." "The truth that we're partners in everything?" Clara's voice shook slightly. "Rowan, that looked like a proposal," Rowan finished. "I know." Clara's breath caught. "Was it?" "Not yet," Rowan said softly, stepping closer. "But it will be. When this is over, when you've proven yourself to everyone who doubted you, when you're standing in this house as its undisputed owner, then I'm going to ask you properly. And I'm going to hope like hell you say yes." Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. "You can't promise me that. You don't know if I'll succeed." "I know you will," Rowan said with absolute certainty. "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and because I'm not going to let you fail." Clara wanted to believe him, but the doubts that had lived in her head for so long whispered that this was too good, too perfect, too much like the fairy tales that never came true for girls like her. Before she could respond, Mrs. Brennan burst into the room, her face pale. "Miss Whitlock, come quickly." Clara's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "It's the stables. They're on fire." The world tilted. Clara ran. Outside, the night sky was lit with orange flames that rose from the stable block like demons clawing at the heavens. She could hear the horses screaming, terrified, trapped, dying. "Get water," she shouted to the servants who'd gathered. "Buckets, anything." But even as she said it, she knew it was too late. The fire had too much of a head start, spreading too fast through the dry wooden structure. Rowan grabbed her arm as she started toward the burning building. "Clara, no! The horses!" She pulled free, running toward the stables. The heat hit her like a wall, searing and suffocating. Smoke stung her eyes, choked her lungs, but she pushed forward. She could hear them inside, 6 horses, maybe 7, trapped in their stalls. She made it to the first stall, fumbling with the latch as flames licked at the ceiling above her. The door swung open and a terrified mare bolted past her, galloping toward safety. 1 down. Clara moved to the next stall, coughing violently as smoke filled her lungs. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the latch, but she got it open. Another horse escaped. 2 down. The third stall's latch was jammed. Clara pulled at it desperately, her vision starting to blur from the smoke. Behind her, she heard Rowan shouting her name, but the roar of the fire swallowed his voice. The wood began to crack above her, beams groaning, seconds from collapse. Clara yanked at the latch one more time, throwing her full weight into it. It gave. The horse inside reared, panicked, and Clara stumbled backward as it charged past her. She fell hard, her head cracking against the ground, stars exploding across her vision. Through the haze of pain and smoke, she saw the ceiling beam directly above her start to fall. And then Rowan was there, grabbing her, dragging her backward with strength born of pure terror. They made it outside just as the entire stable roof collapsed inward with a sound like the world ending. Clara lay on the cold ground, gasping for air, her lungs burning, her head spinning. Rowan was beside her, his face black with soot, his eyes wild. "Are you insane?" he shouted, though his voice was rough with smoke. "You could have died." "The horses," Clara managed between coughs, "are not worth your life." Rowan gripped her shoulders, his hands shaking. "Nothing is worth your life, Clara. Nothing." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the breath. Around them, servants worked frantically to keep the fire from spreading to the main house. The stable was lost, nothing left but burning wreckage and smoke rising into the night sky. As Clara's vision began to clear, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure on horseback, watching. just watching. The horse shifted, and for a brief moment the firelight caught the rider's face. It was Edmund Caro. Before Clara could react, before she could call out, he turned his horse and disappeared into the darkness. Clara struggled to sit up, her whole body shaking. "Did you see?" "I saw," Rowan said grimly. The stable fire hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate. Another attack, another attempt to destroy what she'd built. But this time, it wasn't Pemberton. It was the Caros, striking back from whatever hole they'd crawled into after being evicted. And if Edmund was here, if he was willing to burn buildings and kill horses just to hurt her, then he was willing to do anything. Clara looked at the burning ruins of her stable, at the terrified horses huddled in the yard, at the servants covered in soot and ash from fighting a fire they hadn't started. Something inside her broke, not in the way the Caros had tried to break her for 18 years, not into defeat or surrender, into something harder, sharper, absolutely unforgiving. She was done being the victim, done letting other people dictate what happened to her life, her estate, her future. If they wanted war, she'd give them war. "Find him," Clara said to Rowan, her voice cold as winter. "Find Edmund Caro and bring him to me." Rowan's eyes widened. "Clara," I said, "find him." She stood on shaking legs, her green dress torn and blackened, her hair falling from its pins, her face streaked with soot and fury. "He just tried to kill me. He destroyed my property. He hurt innocent animals. And I'm done letting the Caros take from me." "What are you going to do?" Rowan asked quietly. Clara looked at the burning stable, at everything she'd almost lost tonight. "Whatever I have to," she said. And in that moment, standing in the firelight with smoke rising around her and destruction at her feet, Clara Whitlock transformed, not into a victim, into a force of nature, one that wouldn't stop until everyone who'd tried to destroy her paid for what they'd done. They found Edmund 3 days later in a rented room above a tavern in the next county, drunk and broke and looking like a man who'd already accepted his own damnation. Rowan brought him back to Ravenmoor in handcuffs, dragged him through the front door Clara had once scrubbed on her hands and knees, and deposited him in the drawing room like a sack of spoiled grain. Clara stood at the window, her back to the door, waiting until she heard Edmund's ragged breathing before she turned around. He looked terrible. His clothes were stained, his face unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. When he saw her, something like fear flickered across his features. "Good." "Clara," he croaked. "I didn't mean the fire got out of control. I only wanted to—" "To what?" Clara's voice was ice. "Scare me? Destroy what I'd built? Burn me alive in my own stable?" Edmund flinched. "You weren't supposed to be there. The servants said you'd gone to bed. So you were willing to kill the horses instead?" Clara stepped closer, her green eyes blazing. 6 innocent animals trapped in a burning building because you couldn't accept that I took back what was always mine? It wasn't yours." Edmund's voice rose, cracking with desperation. "My mother gave you everything. She raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your head, and you threw her out like garbage." "She stole my inheritance," Clara said coldly. "She lied to me for 18 years. She kept me as a servant in my own house while bleeding the estate dry. I didn't throw her out, Edmund. I took back what she stole." "You destroyed us!" Edmund lunged forward, but Rowan's hand on his shoulder stopped him cold. "We have nothing now. Mother's sick. We can't afford a doctor. We're living in a boarding house that smells like death and rat poison, and it's all because of you." The words should have hurt, should have made Clara feel guilty, or at least conflicted. They didn't. "You destroyed yourselves," Clara said quietly. "Every fraudulent transaction, every stolen penny, every lie you built your life on, that was your choice. I'm just the one who finally said enough." Edmund's face crumpled. Tears streaked through the grime on his cheeks. "What are you going to do? Turn me over to the magistrate? Have me hanged for arson?" Clara studied him for a long moment, this soft, weak man who'd watched her suffer for years and done nothing. Part of her wanted exactly what he feared, wanted him punished, destroyed, made to feel the same helplessness she'd endured. But another part, the part that had survived by being smarter, not crueler, saw an opportunity. "I'm going to give you a choice," Clara said finally. "You can face the magistrate and likely hang for what you've done. Or you can give me something I need." Edmund's eyes widened. "What?" "Testimony." Clara moved to the desk and pulled out a document. You're going to write down everything your mother did, every fraudulent deed, every forged signature, every stolen asset. You're going to detail exactly how she manipulated the estate's finances, who helped her, and where the money went. She's my mother, Edmund whispered. I can't. She's a criminal who destroyed lives for profit, Clara interrupted, including yours. She convinced you that lying and stealing were acceptable because you were entitled to comfort you hadn't earned. And now look at you, broken, desperate, facing the gallows because she taught you that other people's property was yours to take. Edmund's shoulders shook. If I testify against her, she'll never forgive me. Probably not, Clara agreed. But you'll be alive to regret it. That's more than you deserve, but it's what I'm offering. The silence stretched long and painful. Finally, Edmund nodded, his voice barely audible. What do you want me to write? It took 6 hours for Edmund to document everything. He wrote slowly, painstakingly, detailing schemes Clara had never even suspected. Forged letters to creditors, fake invoices from shell companies, bribes paid to local officials to look the other way. A network of corruption so vast and intricate that Clara felt sick reading it. But it was also exactly what she needed. This is enough to file criminal charges, Rowan said quietly, reading over the testimony. Not just against Isolde, but against half a dozen co-conspirators. The magistrate won't be able to ignore this. Thornby's in Pemberton's pocket, Claire reminded him. He'll bury it. Then we go over his head. Rowan's eyes were hard. Straight to the Crown prosecutors in London. With testimony this detailed and a duke vouching for its authenticity, they'll have to investigate. Clara felt something unfurl in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. For the first time since the fire, she could see a path forward that didn't end in ruin. What about him? She asked, nodding toward Edmund, who sat slumped in a chair staring at nothing. He's a witness now, Rowan said, which means we need to keep him safe until the trial. If Pemberton or Isolde get wind of what he's done, they'll make sure he disappears. Clara nodded slowly. Put him in the East Wing. Lock the door. Postguards. You're keeping him prisoner? Edmund's voice was hollow. I'm keeping you alive, Clara corrected, whether you want to be or not. As guards led Edmund away, Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had sustained her for 3 days was finally wearing off, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness. Rowan knelt beside her chair, his hand finding hers. You did it. You got what you needed. Did I? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Or did I just paint an even bigger target on my back? Both, probably, Rowan admitted. But you're not facing it alone. Clara looked at him. This man who'd walked into her life a month ago and somehow become the thing she couldn't imagine living without, and felt her throat tighten. Why are you still here? She asked softly. Really? You could walk away from all of this. Go back to your estates, your life. You don't owe me anything. Rowan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. I'm here because the night I met you, I saw something I'd been looking for my entire life and didn't know it. Courage that didn't come from privilege. Strength that didn't require cruelty. Intelligence that refused to be silenced. He leaned closer, his gray eyes intense. I'm here because somewhere between watching you rebuild that fire and watching you walk into a burning building to save horses, I fell in love with you. And I don't plan on leaving until you believe you deserve that love. Clara's breath caught. Rowan, I know you don't believe it yet, he continued quietly. I know you've spent so long being told you're worthless that actually accepting someone might value you feels impossible. But I'm patient, Clara. I can wait as long as it takes for you to see yourself the way I see you. Tears burned behind Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to break down now, not when there was still so much to do, but she could hold his hand. She could lean into his strength just for a moment. Thank you, she whispered. Always, Rowan said. The next morning, Clara sent the testimony to London via express courier, along with a letter from Rowan detailing his observations and vouching for the document's authenticity. Then she did something even more audacious. She called a meeting of every tenant, farmer, merchant, and worker connected to Ravenmore Estate. Over 60 people crowded into the estate's great hall, looking nervous and confused about why they'd been summoned. Clara stood at the front of the room, very aware that every eye was on her. every ear listening for signs of weakness or failure. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I know the last few weeks have been difficult. The fire destroyed our stables, killed 3 horses we couldn't save, and cost us resources we desperately needed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I could stand here and make excuses," Clara continued. "I could blame the Carrows or Lord Pemberton or bad luck. But the truth is, none of that matters. What matters is what we do next." She pulled out a ledger and held it up. "This is the estate's current financial position. I'm not going to lie to you. It's bad. We have debts, damages, legal fees piling up. By any reasonable measure, we should be bankrupt within 3 months." The murmurs grew louder, tinged with fear now. "But here's what that ledger doesn't show," Clara said, her voice rising. "It doesn't show the new tenant agreements that give you real stake in the land you work. It doesn't show the merchant partnerships that turned creditors into investors. It doesn't show the testimony I just sent to London that will bring criminal charges against everyone who tried to destroy this estate." She set the ledger down and stepped forward, meeting their eyes one by one. "That ledger shows numbers. But this estate isn't numbers. It's people. It's you. And if you're willing to fight with me, if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked, if you're willing to bet on someone the entire county says is going to fail, then we're going to prove every single one of them wrong." Silence. Then Thomas Ridley, the tenant farmer with 6 children, stood up. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "I'm asking you to triple production on your farms," Clara said bluntly. "I'm asking merchants to extend more credit even though I can't guarantee when you'll be paid back. I'm asking workers to put in longer hours for the same wages. I'm asking all of you to sacrifice now for the possibility of profit later." "That's a hell of an ask," Dobson the butcher said. "It is," Clara agreed. "And if you say no, I'll understand. But if you say yes, if we do this together, then when Ravenmore succeeds, it won't be because some rich landowner swooped in and saved it. It'll be because we saved it, all of us, together." Another silence, longer this time. Then Mrs. Fletcher stood. "I'll do it. I'll extend more credit." Ridley nodded. "My family's with you." One by one, they stood, farmers and merchants and workers, every person in that room making the same impossible choice Clara had made weeks ago. To fight instead of surrender. To hope instead of despair. To believe that maybe, just maybe, the invisible could become unstoppable. When the meeting ended, Clara felt lighter than she had in weeks. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was momentum. And momentum was something she could work with. Rowan found her later in the estate office, surrounded by maps and plans and endless lists of things that needed doing. "You inspired them," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I terrified them into compliance," Clara corrected, but she was smiling slightly. "Same thing, when you're a leader worth following." Rowan crossed to the desk, studying the plans she'd been sketching. "What's this?" "The new stables," Clara said. "Bigger, better designed, with proper fire safety. If we're rebuilding anyway, we might as well rebuild right." "With what money?" "I'm selling some of the estate's artwork," Clara said. "The Carrows filled this house with expensive paintings they never looked at. Most of them are worth thousands. I've contacted auction houses in London." Rowan whistled low. "That's actually brilliant." "It's desperate," Clara corrected, "but desperate is where I live now." She stood up, stretching muscles sore from too many sleepless nights. Outside the window, she could see workers already clearing the stable ruins, preparing the ground for new construction. "I keep waiting for it to feel real," Clara said quietly. "For it to feel like this is actually my life, and not some elaborate dream I'm going to wake up from." "It's real," Rowan assured her. "The exhaustion, the fear, the constant scrambling, that's the real part no one tells you about power. It's not leisure and luxury. It's responsibility that never stops." "How do you stand it?" Clara asked. "By remembering why it matters." Rowan moved to stand beside her at the window. "By focusing on the people who depend on you getting it right. By accepting that you'll make mistakes, but refusing to let those mistakes define you." Clara absorbed that, adding it to the growing list of lessons she was learning through trial by fire. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mrs. Brennan entered, looking flustered. "Miss Whitlock, there's a gentleman here to see you, from London. He says it's urgent." Clara's stomach dropped. The Crown prosecutors couldn't have responded this quickly. She'd only sent the testimony yesterday, unless something had gone wrong. She found the visitor in the drawing room, a thin man in expensive clothes with sharp eyes and a leather briefcase. "Miss Whitlock," he said, standing when she entered. "My name is Jonathan Thorne. I'm a solicitor from Whitmore and Associates in London." "I wasn't expecting legal representation yet," Clara said carefully. "I'm not here about the criminal case," Thorne said. "I'm here about your inheritance." Clara's blood ran cold. "What about it?" Thorne opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "I represent the Whitlock Family Trust, a legal entity established by your grandfather 60 years ago to protect family assets in perpetuity. When your parents died, the trust should have activated, ensuring you received your full inheritance at age 21. "But it didn't," Clara said slowly. "No, because Madame Caro filed fraudulent paperwork claiming the trust had been dissolved and all assets transferred to her as your legal guardian." Thorne's expression was grim. "We've been searching for you for 3 years, Miss Whitlock, ever since the trust's audit revealed the discrepancies." Clara's head spun. 3 years? "We traced you to Ravenmore, but by the time we arrived, Madame Caro had already left and you were difficult to locate. It wasn't until your testimony reached the Crown prosecutors that we learned you'd reclaim the estate." "What exactly does this mean?" Rowan asked, his voice tight. Thorne pulled out another document, a thick ledger bound in leather. "It means Miss Whitlock's inheritance isn't just this estate. The trust holds investments, properties, and financial assets totaling approximately £2 million. The number hit Clara like a physical blow. She actually swayed, and Rowan's hand shot out to steady her. "2 million, Clara repeated numbly. "Approximately," Thorne confirmed. "The exact figure requires a full audit, but preliminary estimates put the value between 1.8 and 2.3 million. Your grandfather was a very successful merchant, Miss Whitlock. He wanted to ensure his descendants would never want for anything." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. All this time, all the fear, all the desperation, all the impossible choices made because she thought she had nothing. She'd actually been wealthy beyond imagining. "The funds have been frozen pending verification of your identity and resolution of the fraud case," Thorne continued, "but once that's complete, likely within 3 months, the full amount will be available to you. No restrictions, no conditions. It's yours." Clara found her voice, though it came out shaky. "Why didn't anyone tell me? If you've been searching for me for 3 years..." "Madame Caro was very good at hiding you," Thorne said grimly. "She never filed official guardianship papers, never enrolled you in school, never registered you with any government office. For all legal purposes, you didn't exist. It was only when the Duke's lawyers began investigating the estate that we were able to confirm your identity." Clara looked at Rowan, saw her own shock reflected in his face. "This changes everything," Rowan said quietly. "It does," Thorne agreed. "With these resources, Miss Whitlock, you can pay off every debt, rebuild the estate, and still have more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life." Clara's mind raced. £2 million. It was incomprehensible. It was freedom. It was power. It was also terrifying. "What do I need to do?" Clara asked. "Sign some papers, submit to identity verification, and wait for the legal processes to complete," Thorne said. "In the meantime, I can advance you £50,000 against the estate, enough to handle immediate needs." £50,000. The amount that had seemed impossible to raise just weeks ago. Now it was pocket change. Clara signed the papers Thorne presented, her hand shaking slightly. When he left, promising to return within the week with more documentation, she stood alone with Rowan in the drawing room, trying to understand what had just happened. "Say something," Rowan said finally. "I don't know what to say." Clara's voice was hollow. "A month ago I was a servant with nothing. Now I'm worth £2 million. How does it feel?" Clara considered that. "Unreal. Overwhelming. Like, maybe I'm still lying in that burning stable and this is all a dying dream." Rowan took her hands, his grip solid and warm. "It's real, Clara. You're not just a survivor anymore. You're one of the wealthiest landowners in the county. Which means Pemberton is going to be even more desperate to destroy me," Clara realized. He thought he was dealing with a poor girl playing at estate management. Now he's dealing with someone who can actually challenge his power. Good, Rowan said fiercely. Let him be desperate. Let him understand that you're not going anywhere. Clara nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her. The fear that had driven so many of her decisions, the constant worry about money and resources and survival, it was still there, but it was no longer the dominant force. She had options now, power, choice. I want to pay everyone back, Clara said suddenly. The merchants, the workers, everyone who trusted me when they had no reason to. I want them to know their faith wasn't misplaced. That's a generous gesture, Rowan said. It's a smart one, Clara corrected. Loyalty bought with gratitude lasts longer than loyalty bought with fear. Pemberton rules through intimidation. I'm going to rule through fairness. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara transformed Ravenmore from a struggling estate into a powerhouse. She paid off every merchant debt in full, with interest. She gave bonuses to workers who'd stayed loyal through the crisis. She invested in new equipment, better housing for tenants, improvements to infrastructure that had been neglected for decades. And she did it all publicly, making sure everyone in the county knew that Ravenmore wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The response was immediate and dramatic. Farmers who'd refused to do business with her suddenly appeared at the estate gates, asking if she needed suppliers. Merchants who'd dismissed her as a foolish girl now treated her with deference. Even some of the smaller landowners began seeking her advice on estate management. The shift in power was palpable, but it also made her enemies more dangerous. 3 weeks after Thorne's visit, Clara received word that the Crown prosecutors had issued arrest warrants for Isolde Caro and 6 co-conspirators based on Edmund's testimony and the evidence Clara had provided. Isolde was arrested in her boarding house, screaming about betrayal and injustice as constables led her away in chains. Clara didn't go to watch. She had no desire to gloat over the woman who'd tormented her for so long. But she did receive a letter 2 days later, delivered by a messenger who looked terrified. The handwriting was Isolde's, shaky but legible. You think you've won, but you've just made a powerful enemy. Lord Pemberton won't forget what you've done to his allies. Watch your back, Clara, because he's watching you. Clara read the letter twice, then handed it to Rowan. She's trying to scare you, he said after reading it. She's succeeding, Clara admitted. If Pemberton was involved in the fraud, if he helped the Caros or profited from it, then he has as much to lose from the investigation as they do. Which makes him desperate, Rowan agreed, and desperate men are the most dangerous. So what do I do? Rowan's smile was sharp as a blade. You do what you've been doing. You keep building, keep winning, keep showing everyone that you're not someone who can be destroyed. And when he comes for you, and he will, you make sure you're ready. Clara nodded, but unease settled in her stomach like a stone. She'd won so many battles in the last month, but the war was far from over. Still, when she looked around Ravenmore, at the rebuilt stables rising from the ashes, at the workers who greeted her with respect instead of contempt, at the estate that was finally, truly hers, she felt something she'd never felt before. Pride. Not the foolish pride of someone who'd gotten lucky, but the earned pride of someone who'd fought for every inch of ground and refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier. That night, Clara stood in the library where she'd first met Rowan, looking at the fire burning in the hearth she'd rebuilt 1,000 times as a servant. You're smiling, Rowan observed from the doorway. Am I? Clara touched her face, surprised to find he was right. You are. It's a good look on you. Clara turned to face him. I was just thinking about the first time we talked. You asked me why I stayed invisible, and I said it kept me safe. I remember, Rowan said, moving closer. I was wrong, Clara said quietly. Being invisible never kept me safe. It just made me easier to ignore, to use, to hurt. And now? Now I'm the opposite of invisible. Clara's smile widened. I'm impossible to ignore, and I'm never going back. Rowan pulled her into his arms, and Clara let herself lean into his strength, drawing comfort from his steady presence. I love you, she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Rowan's arms tightened around her. Say that again. I love you, Clara repeated, more certain this time. I don't know when it happened or how, but it's true. You saw me when no one else did. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and I love you for it. Rowan's kiss was fierce and tender all at once, full of promise and passion and everything Clara had thought she'd never be allowed to have. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Clara's heart stuttered. "What?" "I know I said I'd wait until this was over, but I can't." Rowan's gray eyes were intense, burning. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to be your partner or your ally or your friend. I want to be your husband. I want to stand beside you as you rebuild this estate and prove every doubter wrong. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life and watch you become the force of nature I always knew you could be." Tears burned behind Clara's eyes, but this time she didn't hold them back. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes?" "Yes!" Clara laughed, the sound bright and free and completely unguarded. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." Rowan swept her up, spinning her around in a circle as she laughed, and for the first time in her entire life, Clara felt purely, completely, impossibly happy. The invisible girl who'd scrubbed floors and swallowed insults and survived 18 years of cruelty had transformed into someone powerful enough to claim not just her inheritance, but her future. And that future looked brighter than anything she'd ever dared to dream. The engagement announcement appeared in the London Times 3 days later, and the county exploded. Clara Whitlock, former servant, current heiress, now betrothed to Duke Rowan Ashford, became the most talked about woman in England practically overnight. Letters poured into Ravenmoor from aristocrats she'd never met, merchants seeking favor, distant relatives suddenly remembering they'd always cared about her welfare. Clara burned most of them. She had more pressing concerns than social climbing, because 2 days after the announcement, Lord Pemberton requested a private meeting. "It's a trap," Rowan said flatly when Clara showed him the letter. "Probably," Clara agreed, "but I'm going anyway." "Then I'm coming with you." "No." Clara's voice was firm. "This is between him and me. He needs to understand that I don't need you to fight my battles." Rowan's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. "Take guards, and if he tries anything, I'll handle it," Clara promised. She met Pemberton at Blackmore Hall, his estate that made Ravenmoor look like a cottage by comparison. The house was all dark stone and towering columns, designed to intimidate anyone who approached. Clara walked through the front doors without hesitation. Pemberton received her in his study, a vast room lined with books he'd probably never read, and hunting trophies that spoke of violence for sport. He stood by the window, his back to her, making her wait. A power play. Crude and obvious. Clara didn't sit. She just waited, patient as stone, until Pemberton finally turned around. "Miss Whitlock," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "You asked," Clara replied simply. Pemberton moved to his desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He offered one to Clara. She didn't take it. "I wanted to congratulate you," Pemberton continued, as if she'd accepted his hospitality. "On your engagement. The Duke is a fortunate man. I'll tell him you said so." Pemberton's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've changed, Miss Whitlock. When I first met you, you were a frightened girl playing at estate management. Now you're not frightened," Clara finished. "Yes, I noticed that too. Arrogance doesn't suit you." "Neither does pretending we're having a friendly conversation," Clara said coolly. "You didn't ask me here to offer congratulations. What do you want?" Pemberton set down his glass with a sharp click. "To make you an offer. One final time. I'm not selling Ravenmoor. I'm not asking you to." Pemberton's smile was thin and cold. "I'm offering you a different arrangement. A partnership, if you will." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What kind of partnership?" "You've proven yourself more resourceful than I anticipated," Pemberton admitted. "Your management of the estate crisis, your handling of the Caro situation, your fortuitous discovery of the family trust. It's all very impressive. But you're still inexperienced, still vulnerable, still making enemies faster than you're making allies." Pemberton leaned against his desk. "What if, instead of fighting each other, we combined our resources? Your energy and innovation, my experience and connections. Together we could control half the county's agricultural production within 5 years." It was a seductive offer, the kind of alliance that would secure Clara's position permanently, give her access to Pemberton's considerable power, protect her from the kind of attacks that had nearly destroyed her. It was also a cage. And in this partnership, Clara said carefully, who makes the final decisions? We'd share authority, naturally. Naturally. Clara's voice was dry. Except we both know you'd expect me to defer to your experience on every important matter. Within a year, I'd be a figurehead while you actually controlled Ravenmore. Pemberton's expression didn't change, but Clara saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. She'd guessed right. You're being naive, Pemberton said. The county's power structure has been in place for generations. You can't simply appear and expect to upend it. Can't I? Clara stepped closer. I've already done it. The merchants respect me. The tenants trust me. Even the smaller landowners are starting to see that my methods work better than the old system of exploitation and intimidation. For now, Pemberton said quietly. But how long will that last when I start making life difficult for anyone who does business with you? When suppliers suddenly can't get you materials? When workers find better-paying jobs elsewhere? When every magistrate, official, and person of influence in the county understands that supporting you means opposing me? There it was. The threat underlying the offer. Work with me, or I'll destroy you. Clara met his eyes without flinching. You could try all of that, and maybe 10 years ago it would have worked. But I'm not operating alone anymore. I have the Ashford family backing me. I have £2 million in assets. I have evidence of criminal conspiracy that implicates half your allies. And I have something you'll never have. What's that? People who follow me because they want to, not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. You rule through fear, Lord Pemberton. I'm building something based on mutual benefit, and in the long run, my foundation is stronger than yours. Pemberton's face went cold and hard. You're making a mistake. Probably, Clara agreed, but it's my mistake to make. And I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on yours. She turned toward the door. Miss Whitlock. Clara paused, but didn't turn around. You should know, Pemberton said softly, that your parents didn't die in a simple carriage accident. Clara's blood turned to ice. Slowly, she turned back to face him. What did you say? Pemberton's expression was unreadable. The carriage that killed your parents 20 years ago. The axle didn't break naturally. It was sabotaged. The room tilted. Clara's hands clenched into fists to keep them from shaking. You're lying. I wish I were. Pemberton opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a yellowed document. This is the original investigation report. Never filed publicly. Never seen by anyone except the magistrate who conducted it and the person who paid him to bury it. Who? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Madame Isolde Caro. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara staggered, caught herself against the back of a chair. She had them killed, Clara breathed. To get the estate. To get you, Pemberton corrected. Your parents' will named guardians, respectable relatives who would have raised you properly, managed your inheritance responsibly. Isolde couldn't allow that. So she arranged an accident, bribed the investigators, and presented herself as your only option when the respectable guardians mysteriously declined to take you in. Clara felt like she was drowning. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what you're dealing with. Pemberton's voice was almost gentle. Isolde Caro is sitting in a London prison right now, awaiting trial for fraud. But murder? That's a hanging offense. And if this evidence surfaces, she'll die on the gallows. Good, Clara said viciously. Perhaps, Pemberton allowed, but that evidence is currently in my possession, and it stays in my possession, unless you and I can come to an arrangement. Understanding crashed over Clara like a wave of ice water. This was the real trap, not the partnership offer. That had been theater. This was the leverage Pemberton had been waiting to deploy. You're blackmailing me, Clara said flatly. I'm offering you a choice, Pemberton corrected. Accept my partnership, and I provide the evidence needed to see your parents' murderer properly punished. Refuse, and that evidence disappears forever. Isolde serves a few years for fraud and emerges free to potentially harm you again. Clara's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to find another way, to not give Pemberton the control he wanted. But this was her parents, their murder, justice 20 years delayed but still possible. I need to think, Clara said. You have 24 hours, Pemberton replied. After that, my offer expires. Clara left Blackmore Hall feeling like she'd been hollowed out and filled with shards of glass. Every step hurt. Every breath burned. She made it back to Ravenmoor before she broke down. Rowan found her in the library, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, tears streaming silently down her face. Clara. He was on his knees beside her instantly. What happened? What did he do? Through gasping breaths, Clara told him everything. When she finished, Rowan's expression was murderous. That manipulative bastard. He planned this from the beginning, held on to that evidence for years, waiting for the perfect moment to use it as leverage. It's working, Clara whispered. I want justice for my parents, Rowan. I want Isolde to pay for what she did. But the price is giving Pemberton exactly what he wants. Then we find another way, Rowan said fiercely. There is no other way. He has the only evidence. Without it, we make him give it to us, Rowan interrupted. Without conditions, without compromise, Clara laughed bitterly. And how exactly do we do that? Rowan's eyes were calculating, dangerous. By giving him something he wants even more than control of your estate. It took Clara a moment to understand. When she did, her eyes widened. We give him Isolde. Not just Isolde, Rowan said. We give him everyone. Every co-conspirator Edmund named in his testimony. Every corrupt official who helped the Caros. We hand Pemberton the opportunity to look like a hero, the man who cleaned up county corruption, instead of a villain covering his own involvement. He'll never believe we just give him that, Clara said. Not if we give it for free, Rowan agreed. But what if we trade? Evidence of the murder for his testimony against the conspirators. He gets credit for bringing them down, we get justice for your parents, and everyone wins. Except Pemberton walks away clean, Clara said slowly. Even if he was involved in the fraud, he gets immunity. Yes, Rowan acknowledged. It's not perfect justice, but it's practical justice. And sometimes that's all we get. Clara closed her eyes, weighing the options. Let Pemberton control her future to punish Isolde? Or let Pemberton escape consequences to punish Isolde? Neither felt right, but one at least left her free. Let's do it, Clara decided. They sent a messenger to Pemberton that night with a counter-proposal. The next morning, his response arrived. He accepted. The meeting took place in London, in the offices of the Crown prosecutors. Pemberton arrived with the evidence of the Whitlocks' murder. Clara and Rowan arrived with Edmund's full testimony and supporting documentation. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Hartwell, examined both sets of evidence with clinical precision. This is extraordinary, she said finally. Lord Pemberton, you're willing to testify against all named conspirators in exchange for immunity from prosecution? I am, Pemberton said smoothly. I had suspicions about the Caros' activities for years but lacked proof. Now that proof exists, I believe it's my duty to ensure justice is served. It was a masterful performance. Hartwell didn't believe a word of it. Clara could see that in her eyes. But the evidence was solid, and Pemberton's testimony would make the prosecution's case unassailable. And Miss Whitlock, Hartwell continued, you're providing this testimony freely, with no conditions except that the evidence of your parents' murder be included in the charges against Madame Caro. That's correct, Clara said. Hartwell looked between them, clearly understanding that some kind of deal had been struck, but equally clearly not caring as long as justice was served. Very well, she settled. Lord Pemberton, we accept your offer of testimony. Miss Whitlock, I promise you, your parents' murder will face the full weight of the law. The trial began 6 weeks later and lasted 3 weeks. Clara sat through every day of it, watching as witness after witness detailed the extent of the Caros' criminal conspiracy. The fraud, the forgeries, the bribes, the systematic theft that had spanned 2 decades. And then, on the final day, the murder charge. Isolde sat in the defendant's box, looking smaller and older than Clara remembered. When the evidence of her parents' murder was presented, the sabotaged axle, the bribed investigators, the forged documents, Isolde's face went white. Do you deny these charges? The judge asked. Isolde's voice was barely audible. No? Clara felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a hollow ache where rage used to be. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. The sentence, death by hanging for murder, with the fraud charges rendered moot by the capital conviction. Clara watched Isolde being led away in chains and felt nothing. The woman who'd dominated her entire life, who'd stolen everything and destroyed everyone in her path, was finally facing justice. And Clara just felt tired. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Rowan guided Clara through them, his arm protective around her shoulders. "How do you feel about the verdict, Miss Whitlock? Are you satisfied with the outcome? Will you attend the execution?" Clara stopped, turned to face the crowd of journalists and curious onlookers. "I feel," she said clearly, "like justice was served. Not perfectly, not completely, but as well as it could be given the circumstances. My parents are still dead. The years stolen from me can't be returned. But the woman responsible will pay for what she did, and that has to be enough." "Will you attend the execution?" a reporter repeated. "No," Clara said quietly. "I have better things to do than watch someone die. I have an estate to run, a community to serve, and a future to build. Isolde Caro already took too much of my life. She doesn't get another moment of it." The crowd fell silent. Then someone began to clap. Just one person at first, then another, then more, until applause rippled through the assembled crowd like a wave. Clara didn't acknowledge it. She just took Rowan's hand and walked away. They were married 3 months later in the Ravenmore Chapel, a small ceremony attended by the tenants, merchants, and workers who'd stood by Clara through everything. No aristocrats, no society pages, no elaborate performance of wealth and status, just the people who mattered, witnessing two people who'd found each other in the ruins commit to building something new together. Clara wore a simple dress of cream silk, her dark hair loose and crowned with flowers from the estate gardens. Rowan wore his finest, but looked at her like she was wearing diamonds and royalty. When the vicar asked if anyone objected to the union, the chapel stayed silent, except for the sound of birds singing outside the windows. And when Rowan kissed her, sealing their vows, Clara felt something she'd spent her entire life believing she didn't deserve. Complete, absolute, unshakable happiness. The reception was held in the rebuilt stables, a deliberate choice. The building that had been destroyed in Edmund's attack now stood as a symbol of resilience, filled with light and laughter, and people celebrating not just a wedding, but a victory. Clara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, and realized with a start that she knew everyone here. Not as a servant studying people from the shadows, but as equals, friends, allies, family of a sort. Dobson, the butcher, toasted her with tears in his eyes. Mrs. Fletcher gave her a handkerchief embroidered with the Whitlock family crest. Thomas Ridley's children presented her with a wreath made from the first wheat harvested under the new tenant agreements, golden and perfect, and grown from soil they now partially owned. "You did it?" Rowan said softly, appearing at her side as the sun began to set. "We did it?" Clara corrected. "No." Rowan turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "This was you, Clara. Your courage, your vision, your refusal to accept the box other people tried to put you in. I just had the privilege of watching it happen." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Maybe," Rowan allowed, "but you would have tried. That's what makes you extraordinary. Not that you succeeded, but that you were willing to try when everyone said it was impossible." They danced as the stars came out, the rebuilt stables filled with music and warmth and joy so pure it hurt. And later, when the guests had gone home and the candles burned low, Clara stood at the library window looking out over the estate she'd reclaimed. The fields were green and thriving. The buildings were sturdy and well-maintained. The tenants had homes they could be proud of and futures they could control. Everything the Caros had tried to destroy, Clara had rebuilt better than it was before. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked, joining her at the window. Clara considered the question. "I'm thinking about the night we met, when you asked me why I stayed invisible. And you said it kept you safe," Rowan remembered. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then," Clara said softly. "But mostly I was wrong about what safety meant. I thought safety was avoiding attention, avoiding risk, avoiding anything that might make me a target. And now? Now I know that real safety comes from being strong enough that even when people target you, they can't break you." Clara turned to face her husband, this man who'd seen her when she was invisible and loved her when she learned to be unstoppable. I'm not invisible anymore, Rowan, and I'm never going to be again. Good, Rowan said, pulling her close. Because the world needs to see you, all of you. The strength, the intelligence, the compassion that survived 18 years of cruelty and came out the other side, not broken, but unbreakable. Clara kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude and love and fierce joy at having found someone who understood that her scars didn't make her damaged, just dangerous to anyone who underestimated her. Over the next year, Ravenmore transformed from a struggling estate into a model of progressive land management. Clara implemented profit sharing with workers, created cooperative buying systems for supplies, and established a school on estate grounds so tenant children could get educations their parents never had. Other estates watched with skepticism that slowly turned to grudging respect as Ravenmore's productivity doubled, then tripled. Tenants who once barely survived now had savings. Workers who'd been trapped in poverty now had opportunities. And Clara, who'd once been invisible, became impossible to ignore. She spoke at agricultural conferences, advised other landowners on modern management techniques, served on county boards addressing poverty and education. Some called her radical. Others called her visionary. Clara didn't care what they called her, as long as they couldn't ignore the results. Pemberton watched it all from Blackmore Hall, his power slowly eroding as Clara's grew. He'd gotten his immunity, avoided prosecution for his role in the conspiracy, but he'd lost something more valuable, control of the county's future direction. They maintained a cold, professional relationship. Clara needed his cooperation on some regional initiatives. He needed her cooperation to maintain his reputation. Neither liked the arrangement, but both understood its necessity. It wasn't forgiveness, it was pragmatism. And Clara had learned that sometimes pragmatism was the only justice available. 2 years after their wedding, Clara stood in the Ravenmore Library, the room where everything had begun, holding a letter that made her hands shake. Rowan found her there, her face pale but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What is it?" he asked, concerned. Clara handed him the letter. "It's from the Royal Agricultural Society. They want to award me the Hartwell Medal for innovation in estate management." Rowan read the letter, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Clara, this is incredible. The Hartwell Medal is only given once every 5 years. You're the first woman to ever receive it." "I know." Clara's voice was shaky. "Do you know what the citation says?" It says, "I've demonstrated that compassionate management and worker investment can achieve greater productivity than traditional exploitation-based systems." "It's true," Rowan said simply. "It's everything," Clara corrected. She looked around the library, remembering the terrified girl who'd built fires here while trying to be invisible. 2 years ago, I was nobody, a servant who didn't exist in any official record. And now I'm receiving the highest honor in agricultural management. "You were never nobody," Rowan said fiercely. "You were always extraordinary. The world just needed time to catch up and recognize it." Clara laughed through tears. "I still wake up sometimes expecting this to be a dream, expecting to find myself back in that tiny servant's room, cold and invisible and worthless." "You're none of those things." Rowan crossed to stand in front of her, taking her hands. "You're Clara Ashford, Duchess of Ashford, owner of one of the most productive estates in England, recipient of the Hartwell Medal, and the woman I love more than anything in this world." "And a mother," Clara added softly. Rowan froze. "What?" Clara placed his hand over her stomach, where their child grew, invisible but real and precious. "I'm pregnant, Rowan. We're having a baby." For a moment, Rowan couldn't speak. Then he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around just like he had the night she'd agreed to marry him, his face alight with joy so pure it took her breath away. "We're having a baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Clara, we're having a baby." "Yes," Clara laughed, "and I have no idea what I'm doing." "You'll figure it out," Rowan said with absolute confidence. "You always do." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong and certain. She thought about the child growing inside her, a child who would never be invisible, never be told they were worthless, never have to fight for basic dignity because their mother would burn down the world before letting anyone hurt them the way she'd been hurt. And she thought about how far she'd come from that terrified girl in the shadows to this woman who'd rebuilt an empire from ruins and transformed a system designed to keep her powerless. "I love you," Clara said softly. "I love you too," Rowan replied. Always. 6 months later, on a spring morning that smelled of flowers and new beginnings, Clara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Eleanor after Clara's mother. Clara held her daughter in her arms, this tiny, perfect person who existed because Clara had refused to stay invisible, had fought when everyone said she'd fail, had dared to believe she deserved more than the scraps others threw her way, and felt something shift in her soul. She'd spent so long surviving, fighting, proving herself. Now, finally, she could simply be. Be a mother. Be a wife. Be a landowner, an innovator, and woman who'd transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. Be visible, powerful, loved, and absolutely, irrevocably free. Eleanor opened her eyes, gray like Rowan's, bright and curious, and already seeing the world with the kind of clarity Clara had spent years learning. And Clara made her a silent promise. You will never be invisible. You will never be powerless. You will grow up knowing you deserve every good thing this world has to offer, and I will make sure you have the strength to claim it. Outside the window, Ravenmoor stretched green and prosperous under a clear sky. The estate that had been Clara's prison had become her kingdom, not because she'd inherited it, but because she'd fought for it, rebuilt it, and transformed it into something worth ruling. And as Clara sat there holding her daughter, surrounded by the life she'd built from ashes and determination, she realized something profound. She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. She wasn't even the woman who'd refused to stay invisible. She was something new entirely, a force, a legacy. A mother who would raise her daughter to be fierce and kind and absolutely unstoppable, just like she was. The story of Clara Whitlock, the servant who became a duchess, the invisible girl who became impossible to ignore, the survivor who became a symbol, would be told for generations. But Clara didn't care about the story. She cared about the life, the real, messy, beautiful life she'd built from nothing. And as Eleanor's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, Clara smiled. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not vindication, not proving everyone wrong, just peace, joy, a future so bright it hurt to look at directly. She'd started in shadows and ended in sunlight, and she would never, ever go back.